Han Minjai didn't flinch when he handed over the envelope. That was the part that stayed with people who knew him, not the money, not the plan, not even the truck driver's trembling hands as he counted the bills in a parking garage on the edge of Seoul at 2 in the morning. What stayed with people was how calm Minjae looked doing it, like he was tipping a waiter, like a man's life was a minor inconvenience he was scheduling around. Don't make it obvious, Minjae said. Just make sure he doesn't walk away. Park Doo-jin nodded. His daughter was dying. He told himself that changed everything. It didn't. 3 days later, Kang Tae-hyun's car was struck at an intersection in Gangnam, and the most feared man in Seoul couldn't feel his legs. What Minjae didn't count on was the woman in the white coat waiting for Tae-hyun at the rehabilitation hospital. The one person from Tae-hyun's past who knew exactly how to put broken things back together. If this story already has you holding your breath, you're exactly where we want you. Subscribe to this channel and follow every part of this story to the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The first thing Kang Tae-hyun noticed when he woke up inside Sungwon Private Rehabilitation Hospital was the ceiling. White, textured. A water stain in the upper left corner that looked vaguely like a hand, reaching for something it would never quite touch. Stared at it for a long time. He had woken up in hospital rooms before twice after altercations that his security team preferred not to document. Once after an appendectomy at 32 that his father had refused to visit him for because the timing conflicted with a meeting. Tae-hyun knew what hospital ceilings looked like. He knew the smell of antiseptic and recycled air and the specific quality of silence that existed only in places where people were quietly fighting to stay alive. He didn't know what it felt like to try to move his legs and feel absolutely nothing. He lay there for 47 seconds, he counted, because counting was something he could control, and then he tried again. Concentrated. He sent every signal his brain knew how to send. He focused the way he had focused on every negotiation, every confrontation, every moment in the past 15 years when the wrong choice meant someone else would be making choices for him permanently. His toes did not move, his right foot did not lift. His left knee did not bend. Nothing. Tae-hyun exhaled through his nose. Slowly, the way his mother had taught him when he was 7, and the world already felt like it was pressing down on him from every direction. He put his hands flat on the mattress. He stared at the ceiling. He did not call for a nurse. He did not press the call button. He did not say a single word out loud for another 3 minutes, because he knew he had always known that the moment you let people see you panicking, you had already lost. His second-in-command, Oh Sung-wook, was asleep in the chair by the window with his jacket folded over his face. Sung-wook was 51 years old, had worked for Tae-hyun for 19 years, and could sleep in almost any position, in almost any location without complaint. He was also the only person in Tae-hyun's orbit who had ever told him the truth when the truth was something Tae-hyun didn't want to hear, which made him essentially irreplaceable. Sung-wook, the jacket moved, you're awake. Obviously. Sung-wook lowered the jacket. His face was creased on one side, his eyes red at the corners. He had been there through the night, which Tae-hyun noted and did not comment on. The doctor said, I know what the doctor said. He'd been told before they sedated him. Spinal contusion. Temporary paralysis. Likelihood of recovery probable with significant rehabilitation. Timeline uncertain. Who's managing the Mapo situation? Sung-wook blinked. It's 4 in the morning. That wasn't what I asked. Director Lim is handling it. Everything is contained. Sung-wook set the jacket aside and sat forward, elbows on his knees. He looked like a man choosing his next sentence very carefully. Your father called. Tae-hyun said nothing. He said he's arranging for the best rehabilitation team in the country. This facility is his recommendation. He's already spoken to the department head. Of course he has. Sung-wook waited. Tae-hyun looked back at the ceiling. The hand-shaped water stain. And the driver? Park Doo-jin. 44. 2 prior minor traffic violations. He's in police custody. His lawyer is claiming mechanical failure. It wasn't mechanical failure. No. Sung-wook's voice was flat. It wasn't. They both knew it. The intersection had security cameras. The truck had accelerated. It hadn't been an accident, the way rain was an accident, or ice on the road was an accident. Someone had decided that Kang Tae-hyun needed to be removed from the vertical world, and they had found a man desperate enough to help them do it. What Tae-hyun did not know yet was why. What he also did not know was that in approximately 4 hours, when the day shift began, and his official rehabilitation assessment was scheduled, was going to walk, or rather, be wheeled into a room and come face to face with a ghost. The rehabilitation wing of Sungwon Private Hospital was quiet in the way that only expensive places managed to be quiet, the kind of hush that didn't come from absence of activity, but from the deliberate absorption of it. Thick carpet in the corridors, doors with proper seals. Staff who spoke in registers calibrated specifically not to carry. Kong Tae-yoon was moved by wheelchair, which he accepted without comment and hated with every cell in his body. The orderly pushing him was young, professional, and clearly terrified, which Tae-yoon found both understandable and faintly exhausting. He had spent years cultivating the kind of reputation that made rooms go quiet when he entered them. It had been useful. It was considerably less useful when you needed people to help you wash your own face. Sung-wook walked beside him. Two of Tae-yoon's security personnel, Lee Jun and another man named Bak, followed at a respectful distance, which the hospital had apparently agreed to after a conversation Tae-yoon suspected had involved a number with several zeros attached to it. The assessment room was at the end of the corridor. The door was open. Someone was already inside, standing at a light board mounted to the wall, reviewing what appeared to be scans. She had her back to the door, dark natural hair pulled up, white coat, clipboard in her left hand. She was writing something, or rather she had stopped writing something and was holding the pen just above the paper in the particular way that meant she had heard the wheelchair in the hallway and was composing herself before she turned around. Tae-yoon noticed that. He noticed most things. The orderly brought him through the door. Sung-wook held back. The woman turned. Tae-yoon's brain did something it almost never did. It went completely quiet. She was older, of course. She was older. They both were, and she wore it differently than he had imagined in the rare moments over the years when he'd allowed himself to imagine it at all. Her face had lost the particular softness of adolescence and replaced it with something more specific, more defined. She was 34 years old. She stood the way people stood when they had learned through experience that how you hold yourself is the first thing a room reads about you. Her eyes dark direct landed on him and did not waver, but her jaw tightened. Just barely. Just for a half second. And then it was gone, replaced by the smooth professional expression of someone who had made a decision before this moment and was executing it. "Mr. Kang," she said. Her Korean was still accented, but fluent, more fluent than it had been at 16, when she used to apologize after every third sentence. Her voice was lower than he remembered. "Steadier. I'm Dr. Bennett. I'll be the lead physiatrist overseeing your rehabilitation." Tae-yoon said nothing for 4 full seconds. Dr. Bennett did not fidget. She waited. Her pen was still in her left hand. "Amara," he said. Something moved across her face, not guilt, not joy. Something more complicated than either the expression of a person navigating a situation they had anticipated and still found harder than they'd planned for. "It's Dr. Bennett in this context," she said. "I'd like to keep our working relationship professional. You'd like?" "Yes." "You'd like?" he said again. Not as a question, not as mockery, just turning it over. He looked at her for another moment. She had not moved. She was still holding the clipboard. Her pulse was visible at the base of her throat, slightly elevated, but her hands were steady. "You disappeared, Mr. Kang. You promised me you wouldn't. You looked me in the face and you made a specific promise, and then you were gone." His voice was even. Not loud, not cracking. The evenness was worse than anger would have been. "I waited for 6 months. I know. You know I know," she said again. "And I'm asking you to let me do my job. We can talk about everything else outside of these sessions if you decide you want to. But right now, I need you to let me review your scans and do a proper physical assessment so I can put together a realistic plan for your recovery." Tae-yoon looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the wheelchair beneath him, the legs that wouldn't move, at the room he was in because someone had decided his existence was inconvenient enough to justify attempted murder. He looked back at her. "Fine," he said. "Then do your job, Dr. Bennett." She was good at it. That was the thing that got under his skin in the first session, and stayed there. She was genuinely, technically excellent. No performance, no effort to impress him, no visible awareness of who he was beyond the patient file she was working from. She ran the assessment with methodical precision, testing reflexes, measuring sensation, asking us questions in the clipped, direct manner of someone who had long ago stopped softening clinical language and found that most patients actually preferred the directness anyway. She documented everything. She explained nothing twice unless he asked. She did not treat him like he was fragile, which was the thing the other medical staff had gotten wrong from the moment he arrived, that particular brand of careful delicacy that told him they saw vulnerability and were afraid of it. Dr. Bennett saw the clinical facts and worked with them. You have sensation in your upper thighs, she said, making a note without looking up. That's meaningful. It tells us the injury isn't complete. What does that mean in practice? It means the signals are still trying to get through. The swelling around the spinal cord is interrupting them. As inflammation decreases, some function will likely return. She paused. Likely. I'm not going to give you guarantees I can't back up. I'd prefer the honest version. Then the honest version is, patients with your injury profile have a roughly 70 to 80% probability of regaining significant mobility with aggressive rehabilitation. The remaining 20% have outcomes that range from partial function to, I understand the remaining 20%. She looked up at him then, for just a moment. Good, she said, and looked back at her notes. He watched her work. 15 years. He had spent 15 years building something from the ruins of what his father had handed him, not the criminal empire, which had been handed to him intact and thriving in all the worst ways, but himself. The version of himself he could live with. He had done it mostly in private, mostly alone, occasionally with Sung-wook's steady presence at the edges of it. He had not spent 15 years thinking about Amara Bennett. He had spent 15 years becoming someone who did not need to. And yet here she was, standing 3 feet away, writing notes about his spine. Why Seoul, he asked. She didn't look up. This is where the position was. There are rehabilitation positions in America. There are rehabilitation positions everywhere. This one had a specific research component I was interested in. A pause. Pen kept moving. I've been here for 2 years. I know. Now she looked up. He held her gaze. I know you've been here for 2 years. I know you work at Sungwon. I know you specialize in neurological rehabilitation and that you published a paper 18 months ago on spinal cord recovery rates that was apparently well regarded in your field. Her expression shifted, not fear. Something more cautious. You looked me up. You were in my city, he said simply. And you didn't. She stopped herself. Contact you? He kept his voice level. No. You had made your position fairly clear. I didn't make anything clear. I disappeared. There's a difference. There really isn't. She put the clipboard down on the counter beside her. Slowly, deliberately. I'm going to recommend we do this session in shifts. Morning assessments for physical therapy protocols. Afternoon for mine. Why did you take my case? The question landed in the room and sat there. Dr. Bennett looked at him. She had very good control of her face, better than she'd had at 16, when everything she felt had moved through her expression like weather across an open field. Control wasn't perfect. Nothing human was. Because I'm the best physiatrist in this department, she said. It's not why. A beat? No, she said quietly, it's not the only reason. And then she picked up the clipboard again, and the moment closed, and she was Dr. Bennett again, precise, professional, unreachable, and Taehyun sat in his wheelchair and thought about what it felt like to spend 15 years deciding something and realize in the space of one clinical assessment that you had decided wrong. He had been 11 years old the first time he realized his father didn't see him. Not ignored him, Kong Daewon noticed Taehyun, the way a general noticed a soldier he was training. He tracked performance. He corrected errors. He held expectations with the grip strength of a man who had clawed his way from nothing to the center of Seoul's criminal infrastructure over 30 years and had opinions about weakness that left very little room for childhood. What Daewon didn't see was his son. The boy who read everything he could get his hands on because the inside of a book was the only place that felt genuinely safe. The boy who had memorized every constellation visible from the roof of their Hanam-dong house because his mother had loved astronomy and telling her favorites had felt like keeping something of her alive. The boy who flinched internally, carefully, where no one could observe it, every time his father entered a room. His mother had died when he was 9. Daewon had grieved in the particular way of men who don't know how to grieve, by filling every waking hour with work, by becoming more exacting with everyone around him, by treating the absence of emotion as a kind of strength and the presence of it as a personal failing. He had never told Tae-hyun that she was sick before she died. He had never explained. He had simply arrived at the school one afternoon, collected his son without ceremony, and said, "Your mother is gone. We don't speak of it in front of others." Taehyun had not spoken of it in front of others. He had, however, thought about it every day for the next 5 years with the relentless, repetitive quality of a mind that had been given a wound and no instruction on how to close it. He was 14 when Amara arrived. The school was elite, the kind that produced cabinet ministers and chaebol heirs and the occasional Olympic athlete, kind where the students knew from birth that they were being prepared for a specific kind of life and had already begun performing that life before they understood what performance was. Taehyun had always existed at the edge of it, known. Respected in the particular way people respected things they were slightly afraid of, but not close to anyone. Amara Kim, her Korean name, the one her parents had given her to make the administrative process simpler. Though everyone who knew her used Bennett arrived in the middle of the second semester of the year, Taehyun turned 14. She came from Atlanta. She came with her father's engineering contract and her mother's quiet anxiety and a bag full of books whose spines were so cracked from rereading that the titles were nearly illegible. She sat in the third row. She mispronounced 3 words in Korean during roll call and went red from the jaw to the top of her forehead, a flush visible even through her dark complexion, because embarrassment doesn't care about pigmentation. And then she corrected herself with a precision that suggested she had been practicing and simply stumbled at the moment of performance. Taehyun had recognized that. The gap between preparation and execution. The way you could know something perfectly in private and then feel it dissolve under the weight of being watched. He hadn't said anything that day. The harassment had started within 2 weeks. Han Min-jae was 16, 2 years older, held back for reasons that were apparently complicated and never formally discussed, and he was the particular kind of boy who processed his own damage by distributing it. He targeted Amara in the specific, low-grade way that was hard to document and easy to deny, the mispronounced greeting that went on just a second too long, the Korean phrase with the double meaning she wasn't fluent enough yet to catch, the group that went quiet when she sat nearby. Nothing you could point to directly. Everything that accumulated. The day Taehyun stepped in was a Thursday. Min-jae had cornered Amara in the hallway outside the science block. Not physically but socially, him and 3 of his orbit, arranged in the specific geometry of people who want to make you understand that you are surrounded without actually touching you. Amara had her back against the wall of lockers. Her jaw was set. She was not looking at the floor. That was the thing Taehyun had noticed first, and would remember for years afterward. She was not looking at the floor. She was looking directly at Min-jae, with the expression of someone who had made a private decision about dignity and intended to keep it. Just go back, Min-jae was saying. His Korean was fast, deliberate. There's nothing for you here. You don't belong here. Your father is temporary, and so are you. Taehyun put himself between them. He didn't say anything dramatic. He didn't issue a threat. He simply moved through the group which parted, because people who understood power knew when they were in the presence of it, and positioned himself beside Amara as if the configuration of the hallway had always included him there. He looked at Min-jae. Min-jae looked back. After 4 seconds, Min-jae left, taking his orbit with him. Amara said nothing for a moment. Then I had it. I know. I wasn't going to break. I know that too. He picked up the book she'd dropped when they backed her against the lockers. Passed it back without looking at the title. It doesn't matter if you could handle it. You shouldn't have to. She took the book, studied him for a moment. You're Kang Taehyun. Yes. Everyone's afraid of you. Yes. Are you afraid of anything? He had thought about that for a moment, actually considered it, rather than giving the reflex answer. Some things, he said. She had nodded, like this was the right answer. Like she'd been testing something, and he'd passed without knowing what was being graded. They had lunch together that day. They had lunch together most days after that. It happened slowly, the way most important things happen, not as a decision but as an accumulation. They studied together in the library on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. They walked the same route home for 4 blocks, before his driver met him and her mother collected her. And during those 4 blocks, they talked about everything. And nothing with the particular intensity of teenagers who have found someone who makes them feel less alien to the world. She taught him things. Not academic things, they were equals there. Both sharp, both slightly arrogant about it, in the private way of people who know they're intelligent, but have decided that announcing it is vulgar. She taught him other things. The way she moved through Seoul, as an outsider finding the pockets of beauty in places the locals had long stopped noticing. The night market down the hill from the school that sold hotteok that was, she informed him with the authority of someone who had done a great deal of comparative research, objectively the best hotteok in the entire city. The practice of saying out loud what you were actually feeling, which she did with an ease that mystified and slightly unnerved him. Having been raised in a world where feeling things was permissible only if it served a strategic purpose. You never say what you're thinking, she told him once, around the 3-month mark, sitting on a wall outside the market with Hati she'd been technically correct about. I say plenty. You say useful things, things that move situations. You don't say actual thoughts. He had looked at her sideways. What's the difference? She considered. Right now my actual thought is that this is the best evening I've had since we moved here, and I'm a little scared about how much I like it, because that probably means it's going to end. He hadn't had an answer for that. He'd eaten his hotioke and looked at the street below them and felt something in his chest that he didn't have a category for something warm and uncomfortable and important. My mother liked astronomy, he said after a while. She waited. She died when I was 9. I still know all her favorites. Constellations. She used to say that Orion looked like it was reaching for something. He paused. This was the most he had told anyone in 5 years. My father doesn't talk about her. Mine would never stop, Amara said quietly. If something happened to my mom, my dad would talk about her every single day for the rest of his life. It would drive everyone around him crazy, and he would not care even a little bit. That sounds better. It does, she agreed. Yeah, it really does. He had told her things after that. Not all at once. He had been raised in a world where information was currency, and you didn't spend it carelessly, but incrementally. The way trust works when it's real, not handed over but constructed, piece by piece, over time. He told her about his father's business, not the specifics, not the parts that could be dangerous for her to know, but the shape of it. The weight of inheriting something you hadn't chosen and weren't sure you wanted. The way the future had already been decided for him by the time he was old enough to have opinions about it. You could choose differently, she said. It's not that simple. Most things aren't simple. That doesn't mean they're impossible. She said things like that. With a directness that didn't feel naive, she understood the world was complicated, had lived in enough of it to know that the complications were real. But she refused to let the complications become reasons. That distinction had lodged somewhere inside him and had never fully come loose. The confrontation with Minjai had escalated in the spring. Minjai's family owed money, manufacturing, the particular kind of wealth that forgot it had ever been earned, had become entangled in a business dispute with the Kang organization. Taehyun had not been involved. He hadn't needed to be. He was 15 and his father didn't include him in actual decisions yet, only in the education for them. But the outcome had been catastrophic for the Han family. Contracts lost, partners withdrawn, a regulatory investigation that, by the time it concluded, had reduced a family empire to a collection of debts. Minjai blamed Taehyun. The logic was wrong. Taehyun had nothing to do with it, but logic had never been Minjai's strongest discipline. Confrontation happened behind the school gymnasium on a Friday afternoon in April. Minjai had gathered enough people to make it feel like a statement rather than a fight. Taehyun had arrived alone, which was a choice that communicated something specific about what he thought of the odds. What Minjai hadn't counted on was Amara following Taehyun. She arrived halfway through because she had seen the gathering from a second-floor window and understood immediately what was about to happen and had run. She appeared at the edge of the group, breathing hard, school bag still on her shoulder, and said, "Stop." Everyone looked at her. "Stop," she said again, directly to Minjai. Not to Taehyun, who didn't need her to tell him to stop. To Minjai, who was holding a piece of rebar he had picked up from a construction skip near the gate. "You do this, and your life gets smaller, not his. You know that." Minjai had stared at her. "You already lost everything else," she said. "Quit her now. Don't lose this, too." Something had moved across Minjai's face that Taehyun had recognized, not softening. Exactly, but a fracture. The expression of someone who has been seen clearly at the worst possible moment and doesn't know what to do with it. He had dropped the rebar, he had left. The group had dissolved. After Taehyun had said to Amara, "You shouldn't have come." "You're welcome," she said, still breathing hard. "I had it. Everyone keeps telling me that today." She looked at him sideways. "Were you scared?" He thought about it honestly. Of him? No. Of something else? He had looked at the rebar on the ground. Of being the reason someone else's life went wrong. Even him. He paused. He had nothing to do with what my father did. He just needed someone to be angry at. Amara had looked at him for a long moment. "You're not your father." "I know. Do you?" He hadn't answered. That evening, walking their usual 4 blocks. He had told her about his mother's last weeks, the things he'd pieced together over the years from fragments, from a housekeeper who'd felt guilty, from the medical records he'd found at 16 in a file his father had thought was locked. He had told her about the stars. He had told her about the specific feeling of standing in a house full of people who worked for your family and feeling like you were completely, fundamentally alone. Amara had listened, the way she always listened, not waiting for her turn to speak, but actually present in the space of what he was saying. At the end of it, she had stopped walking. "I won't disappear," she said. "I want you to know that. I know you've lost people without warning. I won't do that." A pause. "Promise. That's not something you can promise. I'm promising it anyway." She had looked at him steadily. "Always. Whatever happens, okay?" He had been 15 years old. He had believed her. In 4 months, she would be gone. He found out later, much later, in his 20s, after he had built enough of his own network, to find things that had been deliberately hidden, that she had collapsed at home on a Sunday morning in June. The diagnosis had come within days. Leukemia, aggressive presentation, requiring immediate transfer to a specialist center. That her family had been on a plane within 2 weeks, her father's company releasing him from the sole contract with the kind of speed that suggested they'd been expecting bad news. He found out that she had written letters. He found out that the letters had stopped arriving. He had never in 15 years connected those 2 facts to his father. That connection was coming. It was coming the way certain reckonings come slow, then all at once, with the particular force of a truth that has been building in the dark for years. But in the assessment room of Sungwon Private Hospital on a Tuesday morning, Kong Tae-yoon sat in his wheelchair and watched Dr. Amara Bennett close his patient file and felt 15 years of carefully constructed distance begin to develop, very quietly, a crack. "I'll put together a full rehabilitation plan by Thursday," she said. "We'll start physical therapy Friday morning." Early 7 a.m., she glanced up. "Is that a problem?" "No," she nodded. Moved to leave. "Amara." She stopped. Didn't turn around immediately. Then did. "Were you sick?" he asked. The question was simple, direct. The kind of question that only had one honest answer or a lie, with nothing useful in between. Her throat moved. "Yes," she said. And then she walked out, and the door closed, and the room was quiet again, with the expensive, carefully maintained quiet of a place where people came to be put back together. Tae-yoon looked at his hands. He thought about a Sunday morning in June. Thought about letters he had never received. He thought about 15 years. And for the first time since waking up in this bed, he felt something that had nothing to do with his legs, something older and deeper, and considerably harder to rehabilitate. He pressed his palms flat on his thighs. He couldn't feel them, but he could feel that. And somewhere beneath the numbness, beneath the white ceiling and the hand-shaped water stain, and the machinery of a life built specifically to never need anyone, something that had been very still for a very long time had begun to move. The crack in the ceiling of room 14 was 3 inches long. Tae-yoon had measured it with his eyes over the course of 4 days, not obsessively, not with the particular frantic energy of a man losing his mind, but with the methodical attention of someone who had run out of things he could control and had defaulted to cataloging the things he could at least observe. 3 inches, running southwest to northeast, probably from building settlement, possibly from the water damage that had already left its mark in the upper corner. Nothing structural, nothing that would bring anything down. He was getting very good at identifying things that looked serious and weren't. Physical therapy had started Friday morning at 7 as promised. It was the hardest thing he had done in 15 years, and he had done genuinely hard things. He had sat across negotiating tables from men who intended to kill him before the meeting ended and had left those tables intact. He had rebuilt an organization that his father's recklessness had nearly fractured 3 separate times. He had buried people. He had made decisions in the dark that he lived with in the quiet hours, the kind of decisions that didn't have clean answers and never would. None of that had prepared him for the specific humiliation of trying to lift his own knee off a therapy table and failing. Dr. Bennett ran the sessions with the same precise economy she brought to everything. She was not cruel about it. Cruelty would have been almost easier, would have given him something clean to push against, but she was honest in the way that made kindness feel beside the point. When the movement didn't come, she documented it and moved to the next assessment without editorial comment. When it did come small trembling, nothing like what his body used to do without thought, she noted it with the same neutrality. Again, she said, on Friday morning. Her hand was under his knee, supporting, not lifting. There was a difference, and she was careful about it. He tried again. His knee moved approximately 2 centimeters. The effort required to produce those 2 centimeters left a fine sweat across his upper lip, and a tremor in his hands that he locked down by pressing them flat on the therapy table. He would not shake in front of her. He would not shake in front of anyone in this building. Good, she said. That was not good. It was better than Thursday. She lowered his knee back to the table, made a note. Better than Thursday is good. I used to run 6 kilometers every morning. She looked up from the clipboard. I know. You know. It's in your intake health history. A pause. Also, you were always the kind of person who would run 6 kilometers every morning. It was the first thing she had said in 4 days that referenced anything before the hospital. Anything before white coats and medical charts and the careful professional distance she maintained with the consistency of someone who had decided on it in advance and was not going to let herself be argued out of it. He looked at her. She had already looked back down at the clipboard. Amara, Friday afternoon, will start electrical stimulation therapy to keep the muscle tissue active while your voluntary control is rebuilding. I'll need 30 minutes. We need to talk about what you said. I said a lot of things this morning. Can you be more specific? You said yes. He waited until she looked up. 4 days ago. I asked if you'd been sick. You said yes, and then you left. Her jaw tightened. One of those small movements she couldn't fully suppress, no matter how good her control had gotten. This isn't the right time or place. You've decided that every time and place I've tried is the wrong one. Because we are in a clinical setting and you are my patient, and you disappeared for 15 years, he said, and his voice was still even, still flat. But there was something underneath it now, something she apparently heard, because she stopped talking and was quiet. You promised me you wouldn't. You said always. You were gone the next month, and I didn't hear a word from you, and I spent 6 months checking places. I thought you might reappear before I accepted that you weren't going to. And now you're here in my city, working in this building. And you've known I existed in this same city for 2 years. A pause. How long did it take you to find out I was here? She set the clipboard down on the counter. About a week after I arrived. A week. There are photographs of you in newspapers, Tae-hyun. It wasn't difficult. And you didn't know. Her voice was quiet, not cold. The opposite of cold, the specific temperature of something being held very carefully so it didn't break. I didn't. Why? She looked at him for a long moment. The morning light from the therapy room's east-facing window put a line of pale gold across the side of her face, and for 1 second she looked exactly like the girl sitting on a wall outside a night market, holding hotioke, and telling him she was scared about how much she liked something. And then she blinked, and she was Doctor. Bennett again, and the second passed. Because I wasn't ready, she said, and I didn't know if I ever would be. She picked up the clipboard. Friday afternoon, she said. 30 minutes. Electrical stimulation. She left. Tae-hyun lay on the therapy table and stared at the regular ceiling of the therapy room. No water stains in here, no 3-inch cracks, and breathed with very deliberate evenness. He was not going to get answers on her schedule. He was also not going anywhere. Sung-wook arrived that afternoon with a laptop, 2 phones, a folder of documents that needed Tae-hyun's personal authorization, and the expression of a man who had been managing 17 simultaneous problems for 4 days without sleep and had developed opinions about it. He set everything on the bed table, pulled the chair close. The Mappo situation is resolved. How Director Lim's preferred method. Meaning no one will be filing any paperwork about it. Sung-wook looked at him steadily. The resolution was clean. Tae-hyun absorbed this. Director Lim's preferred methods were effective and created the kind of silence that tended to last, which was the relevant metric. And Park Do-jin? Still in custody. His lawyer filed the mechanical failure defense. The prosecutor isn't buying it. The acceleration was too deliberate, and there's camera footage that the lawyer is currently trying to get excluded. Sung-wook opened the folder. There's something else. Tell me. Park Do-jin met with someone 3 days before the accident. Private meeting. Parking structure in Yongsan. We pulled the structure's private camera footage through a contact at the management company. He removed a photograph from the folder and placed it on the bed. The quality isn't ideal. Tae-hyun looked at the photograph. The image was grainy, taken from an elevated angle, the kind of footage that captured shape and movement more than detail. 2 figures. One was clearly Park Do-jin. The build matched. The jacket matched the description from witness accounts on the day of the accident. The other figure was tall, stood with a specific posture weight slightly back, hands in coat pockets, the particular stance of a man who had spent his life watching rooms and was comfortable being the tallest person in them. Taehyun looked at the photograph for a long time. Tall man, he said? Do we have a name? Not confirmed. But the vehicle registered in the structure at that time slot. Sung-wook placed a second page beside the photograph. Was registered to a shell company incorporated in Busan 3 years ago. We're still tracing the ownership chain. But the previous registered vehicle at that corporate address was what? Sung-wook paused. He was the kind of man who paused before delivering information he knew would change the shape of a room. A vehicle registered to Han Investments. The name sat in the air between them. Hyun didn't move, didn't react in any visible way that the room could read. His hands were flat on the blanket. His breathing didn't change. But something behind his eyes went very still, the way still water goes still, just before something surfaces. Han Min-jae, he said. We don't have confirmation. Han Min-jae, he said again, not as a question this time. Sung-wook didn't argue. He had worked for Taehyun for 19 years, and he knew the difference between when his employer was guessing and when he was reading a room that everyone else was still squinting at. What do you want to do? Taehyun looked at the photograph. Posture of the tall man. At the specific way he stood, weight back, watching. Find me the ownership chain, he said, and find out where Han Min-jae has been for the last 6 months. He's been in Busan, running a private equity operation. Legally legitimate on paper. On paper, Taehanta said. On paper, Sung-wook agreed. The electrical stimulation session that afternoon was the first time something in the clinical relationship cracked, slightly, in the other direction. The therapy was not painful. Precisely, it was deeply uncomfortable in the way that things are uncomfortable when they short-circuit your body's normal chain of command and issue orders directly. Taehyun gritted his teeth for the first 5 minutes, with the focused intensity of a man refusing to give any stimulus the satisfaction of a reaction. Amara watched the monitors, adjusted settings, didn't comment on the jaw tension. At minute 7, his left quadricep contracted involuntarily, a full contraction, visible movement, his leg shifting on the table, and she said quietly, there. He looked at his leg. The movement was already gone, but it had been there. His own muscle, responding, doing what muscles were supposed to do, without requiring his conscious permission. That's the pathway trying to reestablish itself, she said. She was still watching the monitor. Her voice was professional. Her left hand was resting on the edge of the table near his knee, not touching, just near. The signal got through once. It'll get through again, more easily each time. How long? For what, specifically? To walk. She was quiet for a moment. If you put in the work, and I mean every day, maximum effort, no days where you decide your ego needs a break from the process. She glanced at him briefly. 3 to 4 months for functional mobility. 6 to 8 for the kind of recovery where the deficit becomes something you compensate for rather than something you're still fighting. And if I push harder? The timeline doesn't compress by pushing harder. Compresses by being consistent. She made an adjustment. Your instinct is always going to be to attack the problem. I understand that. But your spine is not a negotiation. Everything is a negotiation. Your spine disagrees. He almost smiled. It surprised him, the reflex, the closeness of it. Pressed it. You published a paper, he said, after a silence. 18 months ago. On recovery rates. You mentioned that you'd read about it. I didn't say I'd read it. I said I knew it was well regarded. A pause. I did read it. She looked at him then. Actually looked, not the clinical monitoring gaze, but something more direct. When? 3 weeks after it was published. The session monitor beeped softly. She looked back at it, made another adjustment. Her hand was completely steady. Why? Because it was yours, he said simply. The monitor beeped again. She adjusted something that probably didn't need adjusting. Throat moved. The paper was about adaptation mechanisms, she said carefully. The way the nervous system finds alternate pathways when primary ones are compromised. The thesis is that recovery isn't restoration, exactly. It's renovation. The system builds around the damage instead of through it. I read that part. Most people get lost in the methodology section. I got lost in the methodology section. Then I read it again. He looked at the ceiling, a different ceiling from his room. A different room, but the same careful blankness overhead. You wrote in the conclusion that recovery is never linear, and anyone who tells you it is has never sat with a patient at 2 a.m. when the body decides to be difficult. She made a soft sound that was almost a laugh. Not quite. Almost. My department head made me remove that sentence before submission. He was wrong to. He wasn't wrong. It was unprofessional. Honest. Same thing I said, he still made me take it out. This time the almost law was slightly less almost. The published version is much more measured. The published version is also very good, he said. She was quiet for a moment. The equipment hummed. Outside the therapy room window, Seoul moved through its afternoon the way it always moved, continuous, relentless, the city that did not stop for anything as personal as what was happening in this room. Tae-hyun, she said, quietly, not doctor-patient. His actual name in her mouth where it hadn't been in 15 years. I was 19 when I went into remission the first time. I had spent 3 years sick. I had missed everything. School, friends, normal life. And when I got out the other side of it, I made a decision. He waited. I decided I was going to build something that couldn't be taken from me by a blood count. Career. A skill set that existed independently of whether my body was cooperating. Something solid. She paused. Coming back to find you or finding out if there was anything to come back to it felt like picking up something I'd already put down. Something that might hurt more than it helped. And now? Now she stopped. Made one more adjustment to the equipment. Now you're in my hospital and you can't walk, and I'm the best person to help you fix that. And that's what I know how to deal with. The rest of it, she exhaled. I don't have a protocol for the rest of it. Neither do I. I'm aware. The session ended 2 minutes later. She removed the electrodes with practiced efficiency. Documented everything. Prepared to leave. Thank you, he said as she reached the door. Paused. Turned back just slightly. For what specifically? For not pretending you don't know me. She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded, once a small, real acknowledgement that had nothing clinical in it, and left. His father arrived on Saturday morning unannounced, which was the only way Kong Daewon ever arrived anywhere. Because announcing yourself in advance gave other people time to prepare, and preparation was a tactical advantage. Daewon preferred to hold himself. He was 67 years old and had the build of a man who had been physically large in his youth, and was now large in a different way, the density of someone who had survived enough that the body had stopped, making arrangements for the possibility it wouldn't. White hair. A suit that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. He walked into room 14 without knocking and stood in the center of the room and looked at his son in the bed with an expression that was not, precisely, warmth, but with something adjacent to it, the expression of a man who had spent 67 years deciding that emotion was overhead and was paying the accumulated price of that decision. You look better, he said. You haven't seen me since the accident. I was briefed. He settled into the chair that was usually Sungwook's. He did it with the ease of a man who automatically occupied whatever space was available to him without questioning whether it was his. The rehabilitation program Sungwon is the best facility in the city. I made sure of that. I know you made sure of that. Say thank you. Tae-hyun looked at him. Thank you. Daewon nodded. Examined the room. His eyes moved across it the way his eyes moved across every room, cataloging exits, resources, people. Your doctor. What about her? She's American. Korean American. She trained here for 2 years and has practiced at Sungwon for 2 more. She's the most qualified physiatrist in the department. A pause. You already know all of this. You vetted the facility. Did. Daewon looked at him. His face was unreadable in the way of faces that have been held carefully unreadable for decades. Bennett. That name is familiar. It should be. Tae-hyun. Her name is Amara Bennett, Tae-hyun said. She was at Goryeo Academy for 1 semester when we were teenagers. Her family left suddenly in June of our 2nd year together. He kept his voice level. She wrote to me. Did you know she wrote to me? The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. That was all it took. 2 seconds, and something that had been a suspicion for 15 years crystallized into something he couldn't unknow. Father. Daewon looked at the window, at Seoul beyond it. She was distracting you. She was my friend. You were being prepared for a specific future. She was sick. The evenness in his voice cracked, finally just at the edge, just enough to be audible. She had leukemia. She was a teenager with leukemia who was afraid, and she wrote to the one person she thought she could reach, and you took those letters. I made a decision that was best for... For who? His voice was quiet again now, but the crack had done something, let air into the room that hadn't been there before. She was alone, she was sick and alone, and she reached out, and you decided her letters were inconvenient. He looked at his father. How many? Daewon said nothing. How many letters did she write? A long silence. Daewon looked at his hands. They were large hands, the hands of a man who had built things physically before he built them financially. They were very still. I don't remember the exact number. Guess I kept them. Taehyun went very still. What? I didn't. Daewon stopped. Something moved across his face that Taehyun had not seen there before, or had seen so rarely he almost didn't recognize it. I told myself I would give them to you when the time was right, when your position was more stable, when the business was. He stopped again. Kept them. They're in my study at the house, in a box in the lower left drawer of the desk. Taehyun said nothing. The room was quiet, with a quality different from the hospital's usual expensive hush. This was the quiet of an earthquake that has just finished, the air still vibrating, the dust not yet settled enough to see clearly. I need you to leave, Taehyun said. Taehyun, get out of my room. Dae-swan stood, slowly with the stiffness of a man who had been sitting in hard chairs for more years than his joints appreciated. He buttoned his jacket. He moved to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. I want you to understand, he said. To the door, not turning, that I have never known how to. He stopped. I made decisions I believed were right. I know you believed that. That's not what you're angry about. No, Taehyun said. It's not. Daewon left. Taehyun lay in the silence and breathed. He breathed the way his mother had taught him. In for 4 counts. Out for 4 counts. The ceiling was still white. The crack was still 3 inches long. He called Sung-wook. I need you to go to my father's house, he said, when the call connected. His study. Lower left drawer of the desk. There's a box. Pause. What's in letters? Taehyun said. Bring them to me. Amara found out about the letters by accident, which was the worst possible way to find out about them. Not her own discovery. Not Taehyun telling her, but Park Soo-jin, one of the junior nursing staff, who had apparently overheard something she shouldn't have and had mentioned it to a colleague in the corridor outside Amara's office in the particular low voice that carries further than its speaker intends. She caught 3 words through the partly open door. Letters. Kang kept. She sat very still at her desk for approximately 90 seconds. Then she stood up, walked to room 14, knocked twice and opened the door without waiting. Yoon was sitting up in bed. On his lap was a wooden box, small, plain, old enough that the hinges had gone dark. Beside him on the blanket were letters, a stack of them. Envelopes opened, pages partially unfolded, 15-year-old handwriting in ink that had faded from black to a dark brown at the edges. Her handwriting. She recognized it from across the room because it was hers. She'd been 18 when she wrote most of them. Had been writing them from a hospital bed in Atlanta with one hand in a drip line and the conviction that if she just explained clearly enough, he would understand. She stood in the doorway. Taehyun looked at her. His face was, she didn't have a clinical category for what his face was doing. She knew what it looked like when Kang Taehyun was managing his expression, and she knew what it looked like when he'd stopped bothering. This was the latter. He looked like someone had removed something from him that he hadn't known was there. You sent 31 letters, he said. She couldn't answer. The last one was dated. He checked the envelope in his hand. His voice was steady, with the specific steadiness of something held very tightly. 3 years after you left. You were writing to me for 3 years. Taehyun. You kept writing to me after you went into remission. You wrote when you started university. You wrote when you got into medical school. He set the letter down, carefully, like it was breakable, which it was. Everything was. Everything had always been. You wrote that you'd tried to find a contact number for me and couldn't. You wrote that you were sorry you'd broken the promise. I was sorry, she said. Her voice came out wrong, too thin, too exposed. I was. I kept writing because it was the only thing I could still do. And I didn't know if they were getting through, but I needed there to be something. I needed to feel like you knew I hadn't just... She stopped, pressed her lips together. Her hands were shaking. She locked them behind her back. I didn't break the promise on purpose. I know that now. You didn't know it then. No. He looked at the letters. No. For 15 years I thought... He stopped, exhaled. I thought you had decided I wasn't worth coming back to. The sentence landed in the room like something physical. Amara crossed the distance between the door and his bed in 8 steps. She sat in the chair beside him, Sung-wook's chair, everyone's chair, the only chair, and she looked at him directly, because she was done maintaining distance when the thing they were maintaining distance from was already in the room with them. You were worth coming back to, she said. You were always worth it. I was 18 years old, and I was sick, and I was terrified, and coming back felt like something I had to earn first. Like I had to be well enough, stable enough, built enough. Like I couldn't show up broken and expect you to— She stopped again. Expect me to what? Want me anyway. The room was very quiet. Outside Seoul was doing what Seoul did, continuous and relentless, and utterly indifferent to the specific human wreckage in room 14 of Sungwon Private Hospital. Taehyun looked at her for a long time. She let him look. She was done managing what he saw. I would have, he said finally. I know that now, she said. They sat with that for a moment, the particular weight of information that comes 15 years too late and still somehow manages to matter. Then Taehyun shifted slightly, reached into the box, and removed one more envelope. He held it out. This one, he said, the last one you sent. She took it, looked at her own handwriting on the outside. The Atlanta postmark, the address she'd found from a school directory that was probably already outdated by the time she used it. Her own name in the return corner, because she'd still been hoping. I wrote in it that I was going to become a doctor, she said, without opening it. Yes, I wrote that I was going to specialize in rehabilitation because watching physiotherapists during my own treatment convinced me there was nothing more important than helping people come back from what their bodies did to them. She set the letter on her knee. I wrote that if I ever found you again, I wasn't going to run. That I was going to be brave enough to stay. He was watching her. She looked up. I'm staying, she said. He held her gaze. You're my doctor. I know. That's still, I'm your doctor. And that requires a certain— She stopped, because the distinctions she'd spent 4 days carefully constructing were doing something inconvenient, which was dissolving. I need to be your doctor right now. Clinically, professionally. Because you need actual rehabilitation, and I am the person most qualified to provide it, and I am not going to compromise that because of our history. I know. But when you are recovered enough— When I'm recovered enough, he said, we're going to have a conversation that has been waiting 15 years. She nodded once. Something that had been tight in her chest since the moment he was wheeled through her assessment room. Door loosened, fractionally, which was almost worse than the tightness because it told her exactly how much she'd been holding. Friday, she's 7 a.m. No skipping. I don't skip things. You skipped Wednesday's session. I had a family situation. Your family situation can be scheduled around your recovery. She stood, straightened her coat. I'm serious, Taehyun. You have to be consistent. Every day. Every day, he agreed. She picked up the last letter from her knee, set it back on the bed beside the box. Keep them, she said. They're yours. They're what I was saying to you when I couldn't reach you. She looked at the stack of letters. That's 15 years of trying. I don't need them back. I need you to know they existed. He put his hand over the letters. Not dramatically. Just placed it there. She left. The confirmation came 4 days later, and it came not through Sungwook's Sunk Network or any of the channels Taehyun would have used himself, but through Amara. She had been quiet about it, had been doing something in the evenings after her clinical hours that Taehyun's instincts told him was not just hospital paperwork, though she hadn't told him what it was. He knew the look. He'd spent his life around people who were working toward a conclusion they hadn't shared yet. She came to room 14 at 7:30 p.m. on a Wednesday, which was not a scheduled session time, which meant this was not a clinical visit. She sat in the chair. She put a folder on the bed. Don't ask me how I got this, she said before he could speak. He looked at the folder. I've been pulling everything I could find about the accident, she said. Publicly available reports, the police file summary that ran in 2 legal publications, traffic camera schedules for the Gangnam intersection. And I called a friend. She works in criminal law. She pulled the disposition summary for Park Do-jin's case. She tapped the folder. His lawyer is negotiating a sentencing deal. The mechanical failure defense collapsed because the camera footage was admitted. He's going to plead to a lesser charge. I know this. Lesser charge means reduced sentence. Probably 20 months, out in 14 with behavior. I know this too. He was paid, she said. We both know that, and the police know that, and his lawyer knows that, and the prosecutor probably knows that. But the man who paid him— She tapped the folder again. Has not been named in any document, in any report. The investigation into who contacted Park Do-jin has been officially suspended due to lack of evidence. Taehyun looked at her. A week ago, she said carefully, Park Do-jin's daughter, she's 8? She has a heart condition, was moved from her waiting list to the top of it for a procedure she'd been waiting 11 months for. The procedure has been privately funded. The funding source is not disclosed. Taehyun was very still. Someone paid for his daughter's surgery, Amara said. Someone with enough reach to move a hospital waiting list. After which Park Doo-jin stopped cooperating with any investigative follow-up, and his lawyer pivoted to the lesser plea. She sat back. This isn't a man protecting himself out of loyalty. He's protecting someone who has leverage on him in both directions, who hurt him enough to use him, and then helped him enough to own him. Amara. His voice was quiet. How long have you been doing this? 2 weeks. You've been investigating. I've been trying to understand who tried to kill you, she said, and the plainness of it, just that, no ornamentation, just the direct fact of it, hit him with more force than anything elaborately expressed. And I found something this afternoon that you need to know. She opened the folder, removed a single page, set it on the bed. It was a company registration document. Busan Municipal Business Registry. Han Investments Limited, registered 4 years ago. Listed director, a name he didn't recognize. But the secondary signatory, the co-registrant, required by Busan's municipal business law, for all entities above a certain asset threshold, was a name he recognized very well. Han Min-jae. Sung Wook's photograph of the parking structure. The tall man with his weight shifted back. The envelope with the settlement payment for the surgery funding. The timeline of the investigation suspension. Tae-hyun looked at the page for a long time. Then he looked at Amara. He tried to kill me, Tae-hyun said. And then he covered it. He picked up the page. And the cover is unraveling. Which means he knows it's unraveling, she said. Which means he knows I'm alive. Tae-hyun set the page down. His hand was steady. His voice was steady. Everything was steady with the particular steadiness that precedes something very large and very loud. He was expecting a war, an empty chair at the top of the Kang organization. Succession chaos. Everything that comes when you remove the head and the body doesn't know it yet. Instead, you're here. Instead, I'm here. He looked at her. And now he has to decide whether to finish what he started. The silence in room 14 was no longer the quiet of recovery. It was the quiet before something breaks open, before a man with nothing left to lose, and a 15-year grudge, and enough money to cover his tracks, decides that the cleaner solution is a second attempt, this time, without a reluctant middleman, and a daughter with a heart condition complicating the mathematics. Amara looked at him. She was not afraid, or she was afraid, and had decided it wasn't relevant, which he recognized because it was the same decision he made every time he walked into a room that might kill him. What do you need? She asked. He looked at the folder. At 15 years of someone else's planning. At the parking structure photograph and the company registration, and the shape of a grudge that had apparently never stopped building. I need Sung Wook, he said, and I need you to stay close to this building for the next 72 hours. Tae-hyun. He doesn't know about you, he said. He doesn't know what you are to me. That's the only advantage we have that isn't already compromised, and I need you to not be visible until understand how much he knows. She looked at him. Please, he said, and it was the first time in 15 years he had said that word to another person, and meant it without conditions. She nodded. Outside, Seoul carried on through its evening, the city of 10 million decisions, running uninterrupted, indifferent to the man in the hospital bed, who had just run out of the last exit he'd been keeping in reserve, and the woman beside him who had spent 15 years building something that couldn't be taken from her and was now watching the walls of it absorb a threat she hadn't planned for. There was no road back from what they had just laid out on the bed between them. There was only forward toward Han Min-jae, toward a reckoning that had been delayed by 15 years and a truck and a parking garage payment and 31 letters sitting in an old wooden box, and toward whatever version of themselves would be left standing on the other side of it. Sung Wook arrived at 11:40 p.m. He didn't knock. He had a keycard Tae-hyun had arranged that on the second day, because there were going to be conversations in this room that required no witnesses beyond the two of them, and a man standing in a hospital corridor waiting for a nurse to open a door was a man who could be observed. Sung Wook understood this without being told. He understood most things without being told, which was the reason he was still alive after 19 years in the position he occupied. He came in, closed the door, stood in the center of the room, and looked at the folder on the bed. You've seen it, Tae-hyun said. I put half of it together myself. Sung Wook sat in the chair. He had the look of a man who had been running on 3 hours of sleep for a week and had stopped pretending this wasn't the case. The other half your doctor assembled faster than I expected. She's thorough. She's more than thorough. He looked at the door, then back. She pulled a legal publication summary and a Busan Municipal Registry in 2 weeks with no access to our network. With actual network access, she'd be dangerous. Don't give her network access. Planning to, he paused. Minjai knows the Dojin situation is compromised. We've confirmed he had a contact inside the prosecutor's office who flagged the evidence admission the same day it happened. He's had approximately 10 days to recalibrate. What's he recalibrating toward? Sung-wook was quiet for a moment. Particular quiet of a man building a sentence carefully. Our source in Sasan says Minjai flew to Seoul 4 days ago. Private flight. Not logged under his name, the registration is through a third company, 2 layers removed from Han Investments. He's in the city, Tae-hyun. He's been here for 4 days, and we didn't know. The room absorbed this. Tae-hyun looked at the window. Seoul at midnight, the city never went fully dark. Just changed the register of its light. Neon and street lamp replacing daylight, the volume dropping, but never reaching silence. He had spent his entire life inside this city. He knew it the way he knew his own hands, every district, every corridor of influence, every pocket of loyalty, and every fault line of potential betrayal. He had believed for 20 years that this knowledge was a form of protection. Minjai had grown up in the same city. He has people here, Tae-hyun said. Yes. And he knows I'm stationary, yes. And he's had 4 days. He turned from the window. Where is he? We're still locating. The flight landed at Gimpo under the shell registration. After that, the trail goes. Sung-wook made a gesture that meant the trail had been deliberately obscured by someone who knew how trails were followed. We're working on it. Work faster, we are. Sung-wook leaned forward. There's something else, and I need you to hear it before I tell you what I think it means. Tae-hyun looked at him. The shell company registration. Han Investments, the Busan filing. You saw Minji's name as secondary signatory. Yes, the primary signatory, the listed director, whose name neither of us recognized. Sung-wook reached into his jacket, removed a single folded page, set it on the bed without unfolding it. I ran the identity documents. The registration used a resident identification number. It took 2 days to trace because it was partially altered. But the original number Tae-hyun reached for the page. Read it before you react, Sung-wook said, which was something he had said perhaps 4 times in 19 years, and every time he had said it, what followed had required all 4 of those words. Tae-hyun unfolded the page. He read the name. He read it again. The page was very still in his hands. His hands were very still. His breathing did not change in any way that the room could register. He sat with the name on the page and felt something happen behind his sternum that he did not have a word for and did not want one. Primary registered director of Han Investments Limited, Busan, was listed under a partial alias, but the resident identification number, traced through a contact at the National Registry, resolved to a single identity. Kong Daewon, his father. He didn't call Sung-wook back for 3 hours. In those 3 hours, he lay flat on the bed and stared at the ceiling with the lights off and did not move. His legs, which had been producing fractional improvements for 10 days, felt as absent as they had on the first morning. Not because anything had changed physically, because the part of his brain responsible for registering what his body was doing had redirected every available resource to processing a single fact that would not process cleanly, no matter how many times he turned it over. His father, Kong Daewon, who had arranged this hospital, who had arrived unannounced and sat in Sung-wook's chair and told him the letters were in the lower left drawer of the desk, who had said with the particular difficulty of a man for whom that kind of sentence required visible effort, I have never known how to. His father, who had decided that Amara's letters were a distraction and kept them for 15 years. His father, who had apparently also decided, at some point in the years between then and now, to co-register a private equity shell company with the man who had tried to kill his son. The 2 facts sat beside each other in the dark and refused to arrange themselves into anything coherent. He was Kong Tae-hyun. He had spent 20 years in a world where information was the primary currency, and he had become very good at converting it into meaning. He could read a room, read a negotiation, read a threat before the person issuing it had finished the sentence. Could not read this. He called Sung-wook at 3 a.m. When was the company registered? He said without preamble, 4 years ago. What's the asset structure? Real estate, primarily. 3 commercial properties in Busan and 1 in Incheon. The investment activity looks legitimate on the surface, but the capitalization source. Sung-wook paused. The initial capital came through a chain that ends at a Cayman entity we've seen before. It's used by 2 of your father's older legacy operations, the ones he hasn't fully closed down. He told me those were being wound up. They are being wound up slowly. Another pause. Tae-hyun, The registration was 4 years ago. That was before the accident, before any of this. I know what 4 years ago means. It means it predates Minjai's decision to have you killed. Whatever this arrangement was, whatever your father was doing in business with Minjai, it may have been separate from the attack. Minjai may have been using the connection without your father's knowledge of where it was going. Or my father knew exactly where it was going. Silence. Or that, Sungwook said quietly. Taehyun stared at the ceiling. I need to talk to him. In the morning now. It's 3 a.m. Call him. Tell him I need him here at 7. If he doesn't come, we'll know what that means. Pause. And if he does come, then we'll know what that means too, Taehyun said. Either way, I'll have an answer. He ended the call. He lay in the dark for 4 more hours. He did not sleep. Amara came at 6:50 a.m., which was 10 minutes before the session was scheduled and 40 minutes before his father was due to arrive, and she read the room in the first 3 seconds the way she read everything, not the clinical version of reading, but the older version, the one that came from years of knowing someone before either of them had any professional vocabulary for what they were doing. She stopped just inside the door. What happened, she said. Close the door. She closed it, came to the bedside. Sat without being asked, because she had apparently stopped performing the clinical distance, and they had both decided not to discuss this transition directly. You didn't sleep? No. Amara. He looked at her. Primary director of Han Investments. The name I didn't recognize on the registration. She went still. It's my father, he said. He watched her face move through 4 distinct expressions in approximately 2 seconds: shock, recalibration, the specific kind of careful blankness that meant she was actively preventing herself from responding before she'd thought it through, and then something that landed between controlled fury and something much more complicated. How long have they been in business together? She said. 4 years on the registration, possibly longer informally. Does your father know about the accident? He knows everything about the accident. He arranged this hospital. That's not what I'm asking. I know what you're asking, he exhaled. I don't know. I don't know if he knew what Minjae was planning, or if he was being used the way Doojin was used, leverage and access, and a man who didn't ask the right questions in time. He paused. He's coming at 7. She looked at the door, then back at him. I should leave before— Stay. Taehyun. He kept your letters, he said. 15 years ago, he made a decision that affected both of us, and I am not interested in managing his comfort about who is in this room when I talk to him about the decision he may have made now. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she moved her chair slightly, not retreating to the door, not positioning herself at the bedside either, but finding a specific middle point that said I'm here without saying I'm involved. A distinction that was careful and real. They waited. Kong Daewon arrived at 7:04. He was dressed, as always, with the precision of a man who did not own casual clothing suit, tie, shoes that had been polished that morning. He pushed open the door and walked in and stopped when he saw Amara. Something moved across his face. Not guilt. Not quite. The expression of a man who has been expecting a specific conversation and has just discovered it will have additional witnesses. He looked at Taehyun. Taehyun said, sit down. His father sat. Han Investments, Taehyun said. Busan. You are the primary registered director. The silence lasted 6 seconds. Taehyun counted. Daewon looked at his hands, then at the window, then back at his son. His face had gone through the same process it always went through. When cornered, not panic, Kong Daewon did not panic, but a rapid internal reorganization toward the version of events most strategically navigable. It was a legitimate arrangement, he said, with Han Minjai. Minjai approached me 3 years before the registration. He was trying to rebuild after what happened to his family's business. Came to me because he stopped. Seemed to weigh something. Because I owed him a debt. Not money, a different kind of debt. What debt? Daewon was quiet. Father Taehyun's voice was flat, stripped of everything that wasn't the question. What debt? His father came to me in 2004. Daewon folded his hands on his knee. His business was already failing. Not because of anything I did. It was failing from the inside. Bad decisions, leveraged incorrectly, partners who were taking from it. He came to me because he had heard I was acquiring distressed assets and he wanted a rescue arrangement. He paused. I declined. I told him his operation was too far gone and the liability would exceed any value I could extract. 3 months later, his operation collapsed. That's not your fault. No, it wasn't. Daewon looked at him. But Minjai was 20 years old when it happened, and he had watched his father spend 30 years building something, and he needed someone to blame, and he chose me. And then he chose you. You've known for 20 years that he blames us. I've known. And you went into business with him anyway. I went into business with him because he came to me with a legitimate proposal, and because having him close enough to observe seemed preferable to having him at a distance doing whatever he wanted. He kept his voice even. Evenness of a practiced man. I believed I could manage him. You believed you could manage the man who tried to kill me. Daewon's jaw tightened. I did not know he intended to. Did you know he was planning something? Silence. 4 seconds. 5 I suspected, Daewon said. He became agitated in the months before the accident. Withdrawn from our communications. He was moving money in ways that suggested he was building towards something rather than maintaining. And you didn't warn me. I was investigating what he was building. I didn't have confirmation. I was in a car accident that paralyzed me, Taehyun said. While you were investigating, the room was very quiet. Amara had not moved. She was watching Daewon with the expression of a person cataloging information rather than reacting to it, which was costing her something. Taehyun could see it. At the edges of her posture, the slight rigidity across her shoulders, controlled stillness of someone keeping a very firm lid on what they actually wanted to say. You kept her letters, Taehyun said. You made a decision when I was 15 that she wasn't good for my future. And then you spent the next 20 years making decisions about my future that I wasn't informed of. At what point? He stopped, restarted. At what point were you going to decide I was old enough to have information that directly concerned my own life? Daewon looked at him. You are my father, Taehyun said, and you have spent 67 years being certain that you knew better than every room you walked into. And because of that certainty, I spent 15 years thinking someone I cared about abandoned me. And because of that same certainty, a man who wanted to kill me was close enough to do it. He held his father's gaze. How many other things have you managed on my behalf that I don't know about? The silence was long. It was the kind of silence that contained an answer, and the answer was not nothing, and they both knew it. Daewon stood. He buttoned his jacket, the automatic gesture of a man reassembling composure physically when he couldn't assemble it any other way. I will provide everything I have on Minjai's activities to Sung-wook. The financial records, the communications, the internal documents from Han Investments. All of it. Why? Because he used our arrangement to position himself for what he did to you. And he stopped, looked at the window. Something crossed his face that Taehyun had not seen there before. Not at the funeral of his mother. Not in 20 years of calculated distance. Something that looked, from the outside, like the wreckage of a certainty. I will not be the reason he succeeds. He walked to the door. Father. Daewon stopped. Did you love her? Taehyun asked. My mother. When she was dying. Were you there? Daewon's hand was on the doorframe. He didn't turn. Every night, he said. After you were asleep. She didn't want you to see how afraid she was. A pause so long it almost wasn't a pause anymore. She was afraid every night, and I held her hand, and I couldn't fix it. And after she was gone, I didn't know how to be in a room with you, without it being all I could think about. He left. The door closed. Taehyun looked at the door for a long time. Amara exhaled. It was the sound of someone who had been holding a breath for approximately 20 minutes. She pressed her fingers against her mouth briefly, then lowered her hand. Are you okay? No. Okay. She didn't try to improve on that. Just let it sit. He loved her, Taehyun said. He's just never known how to love anything without turning it into a problem he's trying to solve. I know people like that, she said quietly. He looked at her. You used to do it too, she said. Less than him. But the instinct is there. She met his gaze. You're better at it than you were. I'm paralyzed in a hospital bed, and you still managed to tell me to stay in the room. She shrugged very slightly. Progress. He looked at her. For a moment, just a moment, the specific tension of the morning cracked, and something underneath it surfaced, not humor, exactly, but the ghost of it. The particular frequency that had always existed between them, even when everything else was difficult. Then his phone rang. It was Sung-wook. He answered immediately. We found him, Sung-wook said. Minjai, he's in Gangnam. He's been using an apartment registered through the same shell chain as the Busan company. A pause. Taehyun. He's been watching the hospital. The ghost of whatever had surfaced went back under. How long? Taehyun said. We picked up a vehicle outside the building, registered under the third shell company. It's been in the same parking position on the eastern side street for 3 days. rotating drivers, so it doesn't trigger a stationary vehicle alert. Another pause. He knows you're here. He knows which building, and he knows you're not mobile. Tae-hyun looked at Amara. She had heard. The phone wasn't on speaker, but the room was quiet and Sung-wook's voice carried. And her face had changed, not fear, but the tightening of someone recalibrating threat distance in real time. Pull the vehicle's occupants, Tae-hyun said into the phone. Don't engage. I need to know who's inside and who they're reporting to. And I need that information before Min-jae knows we've identified the position. Already moving on it. A pause. There's one more thing. Prosecutor's office, the contact Min-jae had inside. We've identified him. He's a junior assistant prosecutor named Kwon Sung-beom, 28. He's been feeding Min-jae case updates for the past 3 months. Sung-wook's voice dropped slightly. And he's not the only one, Tae-hyun. There's a second contact. Inside the hospital, Tae-hyun went completely still. Amara was watching him, reading his face the way she read everything directly, without softening what she found. Inside this hospital, Tae-hyun said, yes, who? Administrative staff. A woman named Park Soo-jin, junior nursing assistant. Sung-wook's voice was careful. She's been passing information about patient movements and visiting schedules. She flagged your daily session times, your father's visit this morning. And a pause. A female physician who has been visiting your room outside scheduled session hours. Tae-hyun looked at Amara. The realization moved across her face at the same moment it moved across his. Park Soo-jin. The nursing assistant whose voice Amara had caught through her partly open office door 2 weeks ago. 3 words carried further than intended letters. Kang kept. She hadn't overheard that by accident. She had been positioned to be overheard. Min-jae had a contact inside the hospital and had used her to deliver specific information at a specific moment, not to expose the letters, but to drive Amara toward Tae-hyun's room, to accelerate an emotional confrontation that would cause Amara to reveal her involvement, her access, her closeness, to identify her as a relevant piece. Min-jae didn't just know Tae-hyun was in this hospital. He knew about Amara. He's been watching us, Tae-hyun said. Into the phone, to Sung-wook, get her out of the hospital. Tonight, quietly. Find her somewhere clean that Min-jae's network doesn't have a line on. Who? Dr. Bennett, move her tonight. I'll explain later. Do it now. He ended the call. Amara was already on her feet, the clinical distance gone, the composure gone, standing in the middle of the room with the look of a person who has just understood the dimensions of the space they are actually in. He knows who I am, yes. He's been using Soo-jin to map everything in and out of this room. Yes. Tae-hyun looked at her. He found the one thing that works on me. She absorbed that. He's going to use me to get to you. He's going to try. You told Sung-wook to move me. Her voice was steady. The steadiness of a woman who had spent 3 years sick and had learned in that time that the question of whether you were afraid was far less relevant than the question of what you were going to do about it. I'm not leaving the hospital. Amara, my patients are here. My work is here. She looked at him directly. You are here and you cannot walk. And there is a man outside in a car who has been watching this building for 3 days, and you want me to leave. I want you to be safe. I want you to be able to stand up if someone comes through that door, she said. We don't always get what we want. He stared at her. I'll be careful, she said. I'll move my schedule, vary my routes through the building, stop using the east corridor. I'll tell Sung-wook my movements, and I'll carry my phone on me every hour. She came back to the chair. Sat. But I'm not leaving. You're not trained for this kind of... I spent 3 years learning how to navigate a body that was trying to kill me from the inside. She met his gaze. I'm not afraid of a man in a car. He looked at her for a long time. You should be, he said. He's not careful the way careful people are. He's desperate, which is worse. Then we make sure he doesn't have the chance to act on it. She picked up his patient file from the bedside table, opened it to the session notes from the previous week. You're going to keep doing the work every day, every session. Because if you're not standing when this resolves, you've already lost something you can't negotiate your way out of. She looked at him over the top of the file. Agreed. He looked at her. Agreed, she said again. Agreed, he said. She nodded. Made a note in the file. Put it back. The break came at 9:40 that night. Sung-wook called, and Tae-hyun answered before the first ring finished and listened without speaking for 2 minutes while Sung-wook laid it out. The vehicle team had pulled the identity of the primary driver, had traced the connection, had found the thread that ran from the driver to a logistics coordinator who worked adjacent to Min-jae's Busan operation. And through that coordinator, They had found the communication log, partial, encrypted badly enough that Sungwook's technical contact had opened it in 6 hours. Minjai's messages to the coordinator from 3 days ago. 3 days ago, when he landed in Seoul, the messages were operational dry specific, the language of someone who had decided on a course of action and was distributing assignments. 2 of them referred to Tae-hyun directly by surname, with references to the hospital address and the session schedule that had come directly from Sujin's reports. Third message was different. The third message mentioned Dr. Bennett by name. It mentioned her clinical schedule, her parking location, her apartment building address in Mapo, which she had never given to anyone at the hospital, because she had been careful, had been private, had maintained the separation between her professional and personal life with the same diligence she brought to everything. Someone had found it anyway, and the final line of Min Jae's message to his coordinator was 5 words. She matters to him. Use her. Sungwook read it out and then was quiet. Tae-hyun was quiet too. Outside room 14, the hospital moved through its nighttime rhythms, the muted sounds of staff on rounds, the soft mechanical consistency of monitoring equipment, the building's particular midnight hush. He looked at the door. He thought about Amara and her apartment in Mapo. He thought about the address that Min Jae's coordinator now had, written down somewhere, assigned to someone in a city where Tae-hyun could not stand up and could not move quickly and could not put himself between her and anything. He thought about a Thursday afternoon in a school hallway 15 years ago, when he had walked through a group of people and positioned himself beside her because she was surrounded and shouldn't have been. He thought about 31 letters in a box. He thought about what happened to people who mattered to him when he wasn't paying the right kind of attention. He called Sungwook back. Get to Mapo, he said the moment the call connected. Take Lee Jun and Bak. Do not call her first if she's already being watched. A phone call tips them. You get to her building and you do not leave until she's somewhere safe. He paused. And Sungwook. Yes, Min Jae's coordinator. Whoever he's assigned to her building tonight, I need to know their identity before you move them. I need a name. I need the connection back to Min Jae documented. His voice was quiet and completely flat. Not because I plan to use it in a court. Because when I have that documentation, I am going to hand it to every contact I have in the prosecutor's office simultaneously, and I am going to make absolutely certain that Han Min Jae has nowhere left in this country to land. He ended the call. He lay back. He tried to move his legs. His right knee bent slowly, effortfully, not smoothly. Nothing like it should have been, but it bent. Approximately 40 degrees, then lost it. Dropped back. He tried again, 40 degrees. Stared at the ceiling, pushed, and his legs shook with the effort, and sweat broke across his upper lip, and he did not stop, because stopping was not a thing he was willing to do in this room, in this bed, in this position, with this particular threat loose in the city, and the one person he could not afford to lose walking through it alone. 42 degrees he kept going. The crack in the ceiling was still 3 inches long. He was still in the bed. And somewhere outside in the streets of Seoul, a man with 15 years of grievance and nothing left to lose had just made the decision that would force Kong Tae-hyun to become something he had never allowed himself to be, not harder, not colder, not more ruthless, but the opposite of all those things, which was the only version of himself capable of ending this, without becoming exactly what his father had spent 20 years trying to make him into. Question was whether he could do it before Min Jae reached her. And the answer to that question was running through the streets of Mapo at 40 kilometers per hour, in a car driven by Oh Sungwook, who had 19 years of practice getting to places before the worst possible thing happened, and who had never once in those 19 years been too late. Not yet. Sungwook's car reached Mapo at 10:17 p.m. He knew this because he checked the time the moment the building came into view, and made a mental note of it the way he made mental notes of everything, not from habit but from the understanding, accumulated over 19 years, that the difference between a situation you could account for and one you couldn't was usually the difference between knowing exactly when things happened and not knowing. Time was a fact. Facts were the only currency that didn't lose value under pressure. The building was a mid-rise residential block, 12 stories, the kind of construction that went up fast in the early 2000s and had aged without particular grace, functional, anonymous, the architectural equivalent of a man who did his job and asked nothing beyond a paycheck, the kind of building a person chose when they wanted to exist in a city without being visible in it. Amara had chosen well. Sung-wook had Lee Jun take the building's east entrance and Bok hold the parking structure access while he went through the lobby. He moved at normal pace, not running. Not the specific hurried walk that cameras and lobby staff remembered, just a man going to see someone at 10 in the evening, which happened in apartment buildings all over Seoul every night without incident. The lobby was empty except for a security desk, with a guard who was watching something on his phone and looked up with the expression of a man who resented the interruption. Sung-wook showed him a card. Not a police card, something that conveyed enough authority in enough of the right registers that the guard sat up straighter and didn't ask what kind. The woman in 7-4, Sung-wook said. Is she home? The guard checked something on his monitor. Her key card accessed the elevator at 6:40 p.m. No exit since. Has anyone else come in asking about her? Pause. The guard's expression shifted slightly, the particular shift of someone deciding whether the honest answer would cause them a problem. A man came in about an hour ago. Said he was a delivery. Package for 7-4. Did you let him up? The resident didn't answer the intercom. He left. What did he look like? The guard described him in the way that people described people when they hadn't been paying enough attention: medium height, dark jacket, maybe 30s. Nothing that added up to a person you could find in a city of 10 million. Sung-wook took the description anyway. Thanked the guard in a way that made further questions feel inadvisable. Took the elevator to 7. He knocked on 7-4, silence. He knocked again. Dr. Bennett, my name is Oh Sung-wook. I work for Kong Tae-hyun. He sent me. Please open the door. 14 seconds. Then the sound of the chain being removed. She opened the door 6 inches, chain still partially engaged out of habit, or caution, or both, and looked at him with the expression of a woman who had been sitting in her apartment alone for the past 3 hours, running through threat assessments with the focused anxiety of someone who understood what the information she'd assembled actually meant. He called you, she said. Yes, the man who came to the lobby. I know about him. Sung-wook kept his voice level and quiet. Dr. Bennett, I need you to pack what you need for several days and come with me, right now. She looked at him for another moment. Then she pulled the chain and opened the door fully. Give me 5 minutes. She gave him 4. Taehyun's phone rang at 10:43. Sung-wook, she's with me. She's fine. We're moving. Where the Hanam safe location? Clean Min-jae's network doesn't have a line on it. I confirmed that with our registry contact 2 hours ago. How long to get there? 20 minutes. Call me when she's inside. Already planning to. A pause. Taehyun, the man from the lobby, the fake delivery. We got him on a traffic camera half a block from the building. I ran the image through our facial recognition contact. Another pause, longer. He's in Min-jae's Busan payroll, mid-level logistics. He wasn't there for a delivery. I know, he was there to confirm she was home. To establish location before. I know what he was there for. Taehyun's hand tightened on the phone. Sung-wook, get her inside and call me. Then I need you back here. There's more. Tell me. Min-jae's coordinator, the one who has the communication log. He made 2 calls in the last hour. One to an unknown number we're still tracing. One to a number that resolves to a burner registered in Mapo 6 days ago. Sung-wook's voice was flat and careful. The timing of those calls, relative to the lobby visit, and your call to me, Min-jae knows she's been moved. He knows. The lobby security guard. We think he made a call after we left. Taehyun pressed his palm flat against the mattress. He breathed through his nose. He thought about the guard watching his phone. The particular look of someone deciding whether an honest answer would cause them a problem. He's on Min-jae's payroll too. Looks like it. Building management. Not security company he was placed there. Not recruited there. Sung-wook exhaled. Min-jae has been building this for longer than we thought. This isn't reactive. This is infrastructure. He's been preparing for this specific situation you stationary. Her identified the network in place for months. The room felt very still. Since before the accident, Taehyun said. Yes, he planned it knowing he'd need contingencies for if I survived. Taehyun looked at the ceiling, the crack 3 inches, running southwest to northeast. Then this doesn't end by keeping her safe in a location. He'll find the next location. He'll find the next person to use. He paused. It ends when Min-jae doesn't have any more moves. Means, Dojin, Taehyun said. I need you to get Park Dojin's lawyer a message. Tonight. Tell him his client has an opportunity to cooperate fully with a reopened investigation in exchange for guaranteed medical coverage for his daughter. Permanent. Not a payment and endowment. Irrevocable. Silence, Taehyun. If Dujin testifies, it opens everything up. Your father's company registration becomes evidence. The Han Investments connection becomes, I know what it becomes. My father said he would provide what he has on Minjai. I'm going to let him. He paused. And I'm going to make a call. To who, Chief Prosecutor Huang? Taehyun said the name quietly. The name of a man he had a relationship with that existed in the specific gray space between two people who had been useful to each other for years without either one stating the terms directly. He's been looking for a clean, provable case against Minjai's operation for 2 years. I'm going to give him one. He paused. All of it. Dujin's testimony, the financial records from my father, the communication logs Sung-wook pulled, the Soo-jin connection inside the hospital. Every piece. Another silence. You're burning the arrangement, Sung-wook said, with Wang. If you go to him, officially documents testimony, formal channel. I know what I'm burning. It's taken Taehyun. That relationship has taken 20 years. And it ends tonight, he said. Because the only way Minjai stops is if there is no version of this city where he has room to operate. Not through our network. Through the law, he paused. For once, through the actual law. Sung-wook was quiet for a long time. All right, he said finally. I'll get the message to Dojin's lawyer. Call Huang. I'll have everything digitized and ready to transmit within the hour. And Sung-wook. Yes, get her inside first. Then all of this. Already driving, Sung-wook said, and ended the call. He called Chief Prosecutor Huang at 11 p.m. Huang's answered on the second ring, because men in his position answered calls at 11 p.m. when the number was one they recognized, and the recognition came with a specific category of anticipation, the kind that meant the call was going to cost something, but was also going to be worth it. Kang's, he said. No greeting, no context, just the name, with the particular weight of someone who had been waiting for a specific noun to appear on his phone screen. Huang. Taehyun kept it equally clean. Han Minjai. Pause. I'm listening. You'll have documentation within the hour. Financial records. Communication logs. Testimony from the driver of the vehicle involved in my accident, and an insider connection to your own office junior assistant prosecutor named Kwon Sung-beam, who has been passing case information for 3 months. The silence from Huang's end lasted approximately 4 seconds. Sung-beam. Yes, you're certain. The documentation will be certain. Another pause. Huang was processing Taehyun, could almost hear the specific quality of it, the sound of a prosecutor's mind, rearranging a case architecture it had been holding in an incomplete form for 2 years. Do you want? Full prosecution. Everything that can stick, you put it on him. No deals, no reduced charges for cooperation. He goes in for attempted murder and organized crime facilitation, and he doesn't find a comfortable landing anywhere. And in return, you get a clean case, Taehyun said. Documented, verifiable, a witness willing to testify. No gray areas. Nothing that falls apart on appeal. And the Kang organization's current operations. Taehyun had known this was coming. He had known since the moment he decided to make this call that the price of Huang's full engagement would be exactly this, that the clean case he was offering in one hand would require him to open the other hand simultaneously. We're in the process of restructuring. Legitimate operations only. The transition is ongoing. How ongoing? 2 years. Give me 2 years, and an understanding that anything before this call stays in the past. Huang was quiet. Taehyun sat in his hospital bed in the dark, and breathed evenly, and waited because this was still a negotiation, even if it was unlike every negotiation he had conducted before, even if the stakes were his own future rather than a business outcome, even if he was doing it from a position that he would previously have considered beneath his dignity to occupy. He was past dignity. 2 years, Huang said, and the documentation is clean. Clean. Then send it. A pause. Kang. He stopped himself. Started differently. The driver. Park Dojin. If he testifies formally, his daughter's medical situation is not your problem to solve. There are provisions. I know the provisions, Taehyun said. I'm solving it anyway. He ended the call. At 11:50 p.m., Sung-wook called to confirm Amara was inside the Hanam location, door locked, Lee Jun and Bak in position at the building's 2 access points. At midnight, the documentation package transmitted to Huang's secure channel. 12:40 a.m., Taehyun's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He answered. Kong Taehyun. The voice was low, careful, with the particular control of a man who had spent 20 years being angry and had learned to keep the anger just below the surface because he had found it was more effective that way. Been a long time. Han Minjai. Tai-Hyun said nothing. You've been busy, Minjai said. For a man who can't walk. Minjai. That's the first time you've said my name in how many years? You used to walk past me in school hallways like I was furniture. A pause. The anger right at the surface. I wondered at the time whether you even knew who I was. I knew who you were, Tai-Hyun said. And now you know what I'm capable of. I knew that too. Tai-Hyun kept his voice flat, even. The same register he used in every negotiation, not cold, not hot, just present. You were capable of paying a man with a dying daughter to drive a truck into my car. That's not capability. That's desperation. A sharp silence. My family, your family's business failed because your father leveraged it past the point of recovery and then made the mistake of asking the wrong person for help, Tai-Hyun said. My father declined to rescue something that couldn't be saved. That's not the same as destroying it. He could have done a lot of things. So could yours. So could you. His voice remained level. 20 years, Minjai. You spent 20 years building toward this. The company registration, the Busan infrastructure, the contacts inside the hospital. You built all of that. That's not nothing. He paused. It just didn't work. I'm outside your city, Minjai said. Huang has the documentation. Dujin's lawyer received an offer at 11 tonight. By tomorrow morning, there will be an arrest warrant. He paused. Where are you going to go? Silence. You made one mistake, Tai-Hyun said. The same one you've made since you were 16. You thought this was about me. About hurting me, or removing me, or replacing what I represent with the thing you lost. He looked at the window. At Seoul's midnight light, it was never about me. Your family's business, your father's choices, the way your life went, none of that was because of me. You made it about me because I was there and because I was someone you could point to. Don't. Minjai's voice cracked, just at the edge, just enough to be audible. The crack of something that had been under sustained pressure for 20 years and was finding its structural limits. Don't make this into something. Turn yourself in, Tai-Hyun said. Tonight, before Huang moves. If you walk in, there's still something left to negotiate. They come to you, he paused. There won't be. The line was quiet. The woman, Minjai said. And the way he said it very carefully, very quietly, made every hair on the back of Tai-Hyun's neck stand up. Dr. Bennett, she matters to you. Tai-Hyun's hand tightened on the phone. He said nothing. She was always going to be the piece that worked, Minjai said. You have people around you. You have Sung-wook. You have your security. You have 20 years of infrastructure. But her, he paused. She's not part of that infrastructure. Is she, Minjai? She left the Mapo building at 10:17. I know that. I know where Sung-wook took her. A pause. I know because I have people in more places than you've found yet. And I'm telling you this because I want you to understand the documentation, the lawyer, Huang, the warrant. None of that changes the next 12 hours. I have people who don't know about the warrant, who don't check phones, who have a job to do and do it until I tell them to stop. Tai-Hyun was completely still. Call Huang back, Minjai said. Tell him it was a mistake. The documentation was fabricated. Dujin's testimony is coerced. A pause. You have 2 hours to make those calls before someone I can't contact in time does something neither of us wants. The line went dead. Tai-Hyun sat in the dark. He breathed. He did not give himself more than 10 seconds of breathing, because 10 seconds was enough to know what he was going to do, and everything beyond 10 was delay he couldn't afford. He called Sung-wook. Minjai has a second team, he said, the moment the call connected. People who haven't been contacted about the warrant. How many entry points does the Hanam building have? Sung-wook's voice sharpened immediately. 4. We have 2 covered. Cover all 4. Right now. I don't care what it costs or who you pull to do it. He was already moving, sits up swinging his legs over the side of the bed. His legs, which had 42 degrees of bend and a tremor that hadn't fully resolved, and approximately 40% of their previous function, depending on the day and the session. And get me a car. You can't get me a car or I'll take a hospital transport van. He stood. The floor came up to meet his feet. He held the bedside rail. His legs shook, not with weakness exactly, but with the specific vibration of tissue, being asked to do something it had been doing in fragments for 2 weeks and had not yet been cleared to do in full. He held the rail and he breathed and he did not sit back down. A car, he said again. June is already moving to cover the 4th entrance. Sung-wook was saying, overlapping with him. The second team is, we're identifying. It takes time. I know it takes time. I'm coming anyway. He took 1 step, then another. The steps were wrong, too slow. Wrong distribution of weight. The left side stronger than the right, because the right knee was still rebuilding. They were steps. Send the car to the hospital's south entrance. Not the main entrance. Taehyun south entrance, he said. 5 minutes. He got to the door by holding the wall. He opened it. The corridor was dim, nighttime staffed. A nurse at the far end of the hall who looked up and went very past the sight of him. The patient from room 14, standing in the doorway in a hospital gown, holding the door frame with one hand, straightened. I need clothes, he said to the nurse. Across the corridor's careful quiet. Whatever's in my personal items bag. Bring it to me. Dared. Please, he added, because Amara would have said the same thing, and because please was not a word he was done with. He got to the south entrance in 11 minutes. Took that long because the corridor to the south exit was longer than the corridor he'd been using, and because walking at 30% of his former speed across a distance that used to take 90 seconds now took 5 minutes, and because twice he had to stop and grip a wall rail and breathe through the shaking in his right leg before he could continue. He did not sit down. He did not call for a wheelchair. He did not stop moving. The car was there, Lee Jun's secondary vehicle, a dark sedan that Sung-wook had sent with a driver who knew not to ask questions. Taehyun got in the back and pulled the door closed and said, Hanam, and the driver moved. His phone rang. Amara. He answered immediately. Are you inside? Yes, Lee Jun just told me Taehyun. What's happening? Stay in the apartment. Don't open the door for anyone except Sung-wook or Lee Jun. Min-jae called you. Yes. What did he say? He looked out the window at Seoul moving past the city. At 1 in the morning, the streets thinned but never empty, the light different from the inside of a car than from a hospital window. He said he has people I haven't found yet. A short silence. But you're coming anyway, yes. You got out of bed. Not a question. I got dressed and took a car. Taehyun, your legs are functional enough. He kept his eyes on the street. I need you to stay on the phone with me. Don't hang up. She didn't argue. He heard her breathing on the other end, steady. The particular steadiness he recognized now as hers specifically, the breathing of a woman who had made friends with fear a long time ago because the alternative was letting it make the decisions. I'm here, she said. He held the phone. The car moved through Seoul's 1 a.m. streets, 9 minutes from Hanam, and somewhere ahead of them, in an apartment building with 4 entrances, and 2 of his best people covering them, and a second team whose location and number Taehyun still didn't know. The situation was doing what situations did when the variables ran out of room to maneuver. It was finding its ending. Sung-wook's voice broke into the call he'd merged somehow, or called simultaneously, the communication working the way it worked under pressure, which was imperfectly but adequately. We have a visual on the second team. 2 individuals on foot, north side of the building. They're moving toward the service entrance. Is Bak on the service entrance? No, Bak is east. The service entrance is get someone there now. Moving. Amara on the line, quiet breathing. The driver accelerating, reading something in the posture of the man in the back seat that made questions feel inadvisable. Sung-wook, they're at the service door. Taehyun, they have a key card. They have a duplicate key card for the building. The lobby guard in Mapo. He wasn't just confirming her location. He was buying time to source a building duplicate from the management company contact. Sung-wook's voice was fast. Clip, the voice of a man thinking at operational speed. They're inside the building. On the phone, Amara. Still breathing, still there. Amara. Taehyun's voice dropped to something flat and direct. Move away from the door. Right now. Go to the bathroom, the interior room, no exterior walls. Take your phone. Lock the bathroom door and do not open it. Taehyun, now please, right now. The sound of movement. Her footsteps, a door lock. I'm in, she said. Stay on the line. The car rounded the last corner before the Hanam building. Sung-wook, they're on the 5th floor. Moving up. Our people are 30 seconds behind. The car stopped. Taehyun was out of it before it had fully stopped, moving one hand on the door frame. Weight forward. His legs, taking the impact of the sidewalk, with the shaking that had been with him since the hospital corridor, that he was not paying attention to, because attention was a resource, and he had already allocated all of it. He was through the lobby in 4 seconds, Sung-wook coming from the right side of the building simultaneously, both of them converging on the elevator bank. Stairs, Taehyun said. To stairs. Which side? Which side? Sung-wook. Sung-wook pointed. They went. The stairwell was concrete and fluorescent lit, and it smelled like every stairwell in every building in every city, a clean, functional, nowhere smell. Taehyun went up it the way he had done everything in the past 2 weeks. Wrong. Took it slower than it should have been. Compensating for the right leg with the left, gripping the railing with his right hand, and using his left arm against the wall on the turns, breathing through the shaking, because the shaking was not going to stop him. Nothing was going to stop him. Not here. Not now. 3rd floor. 4th floor. Sung-wook behind him, close but not helping, because Taehyun had not asked for help, and the stairwell was narrow, and help would have slowed them both. 5th floor. They came out of the stairwell into the corridor. 2 men, dark jackets, one at Amara's door, one watching the corridor, and both of them turning at the sound of the stairwell door, both registering the arrival with the quick recalibration of professionals who had not expected the complication they were looking at. The one at the door had a keycard in his hand, not a duplicate. Something more sophisticated, a bypass device, the kind of which Taehyun recognized from his own organization's less legal operations. What happened next happened in approximately 11 seconds. Sung-wook was faster than Taehyun and covered the distance to the corridor man in 3 steps, and what followed between them was brief and professional, and resulted in the corridor man sitting against the wall with both hands occupied, and Sung-wook standing over him. The doorman reacted, pushed off the doorframe, moved toward Taehyun, which was probably a tactical miscalculation, born from looking at a man who was walking with visible difficulty, and concluding that the difficulty meant something about the man's overall capacity. Did not. Taehyun caught him by the jacket collar with his left hand and used the wall. When it was over, the door man was on the floor, and Taehyun was against the wall opposite, breathing harder than he wanted to be, right leg trembling with the accumulated weight of a stairwell and a hallway, and 3 weeks of a body still putting itself back together. And there was blood from somewhere his own, split edge of his right palm, where he'd caught the doorframe on the way down, not serious, but warm and present. He looked at Sung-wook. Sung-wook looked at him. Neither of them said anything for 2 seconds. The bathroom, Taehyun said. He knocked on the door of 7-something. He had stopped registering numbers. There was only the door. Amara's voice on the phone still open in his left hand. "It's me," he said. "It's over. Open the door." A silence from inside. Then her voice, directly through the bathroom door, without the phone. "Are you bleeding?" He looked at his hand. Slightly. "That is not a medical category." "Amara." The lock turned. She opened the door and looked at him, at his hand, at his face, at the state of him in general, at the corridor behind him where Sung-wook was on the phone, and the 2 men were in various degrees of incapacitation. And she was a doctor. She processed what she saw clinically and immediately, but what crossed her face in the first half second before the clinical assessment engaged was not clinical. It was what happened to a person who has been sitting alone in a locked room at 1 in the morning in the dark and heard things in the corridor and is now looking at the person they were afraid for, standing up, standing there, present. She stepped out of the bathroom. She put her hand on the side of his face. He went very still. "You walked up 5 flights of stairs," she said. 4.5, he said. "The elevator lobby is between 4 and 5. She looked at him. "I can't do it again tonight," he said. It was the most honest thing he had said about his body since waking up in the hospital, and it cost him something to say it. But he said it because she was the one person to whom the cost was worth paying. "You don't have to," she said. Her hand was still on his face. His hand, the one that wasn't bleeding, came up and covered hers. In the corridor, Sung-wook was giving directions to someone on the phone in a low, efficient voice. Somewhere below them, Seoul was doing what Seoul did. The fluorescent lights in the corridor were doing what fluorescent lights did, indifferent, continuous, illuminating everything equally without preference. Taehyun held her hand against his face. "Hwang moves tomorrow morning," he said. "When the warrant clears, Minjai is out of options. And until then, we wait," he said. Together. She looked at him. "I'm not going back to the hospital tonight," he said. "No," she agreed. "You're not. And you're not going to argue about that." "I'm going to clean your hand and argue about that," she said. "Those are not mutually exclusive." He almost smiled. She saw it. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has carried something heavy for a very long distance and has just been given permission, finally, to put it down, not permanently, not without remainder, but enough. Enough to breathe. Sung-wook appeared at the apartment doorway. Phone lowered. Wang's office confirmed. "They're processing the warrant tonight. Expedited. Political sensitivity of the target is working in our favor for once." He looked at Taehyun, at Amara, at the specific arrangement of them in the bathroom doorway, with her hand over his and his over hers. He had the grace not to comment on any of it. Li Jun and back have the corridor. 2 on the floor are being held for Huang's people. He paused. Minjai is in the wind. He called you from a burner, and the number is dead. But with the warrant active and his network either arrested or identified, his options are narrow, Taehyun said. Extremely narrow, he'll run. Or he'll make one more move, Sungwook said. The 3 of them stood in the corridor of the 7th floor of an anonymous building in Hanam and absorbed that possibilities, the specific weight of a man with nothing left, who had spent 20 years building toward a moment that had not gone the way he planned, who was now standing at the edge of his own story, with the warrant coming, and the network collapsing and a phone in his hand that was currently as silent as everything else he had prepared. What a man with nothing left did next was the only thing that mattered now. And they did not know yet what Han Minjai was going to choose when the last door closed. Han Minjai made his last move at 4:17 in the morning. Not the move anyone had anticipated. Not another proxy, not another man in a dark jacket with a bypass card and a coordinator on the other end of a phone. Kames himself, which was either the decision of a man who had run out of people willing to work for him, or the decision of a man who had finally understood that the distance he'd maintained between himself and his own violence had been the top thing keeping him from the truth of what he was doing. Either way, he came. The building's north entrance camera picked him up first. Sungwook had people on all 4 entrances by then, and the alert came through on Li Jun's phone. At 4:14, a man in a dark coat, medium height, walking with the specific purposeful pace of someone who has made a decision and is no longer deliberating. Li Jun sent the image to Sungwook. Sungwook looked at it for 3 seconds and called Taehyun. Taehyun was awake. He had been awake since his moved into Amara's apartment, sitting at her kitchen table while she cleaned the split on his palm, with the focused efficiency of a physician who was angry and was doing the thing she knew how to do instead of the thing she felt, which was the most Amara way of handling a situation that existed. She had wrapped it. She had told him it didn't need stitches in a tone that suggested she was including that information for completeness rather than his reassurance. She had made coffee, which neither of them needed, and both of them drank, and they had sat across from each other at the small table in the small kitchen of the apartment she had chosen for its anonymity and its distance from anything that mattered to her professionally, and they had talked in the way people talked at 4 in the morning, when the situation was still unresolved, and talking was the only thing available that was better than silence. She had told him about Atlanta, about the particular texture of being sick at 18 in a city that wasn't Seoul, in a family that was trying to hold itself together around a diagnosis that none of them had had the vocabulary for, about the letters, not the content of them, which he now had in a box in a hospital room, but the act of writing them, how she had written them, the way some people walked not to get somewhere, but because movement was proof of continued existence. He had told her about the months after she left. Not dramatically, he was past performing his own history by now, just the facts of it, with the particular flatness of someone reporting on a period they had already spent a long time metabolizing, the waiting. The conclusion he had eventually reached, the way he had packed the possibility of her into a specific drawer in his mind and closed it and built things on top of it for 15 years. And now the drawer is open, she said. The drawer is open, he agreed. She had looked at her coffee. I don't know what we are, she said. I know what we were. I know what this, she gestured between them. A small, uncharacteristically imprecise gesture has been for the past 3 weeks. But I don't know how to name where we go from here. You're still my doctor, he said. For approximately another 4 months, clinically speaking. Then we'll figure out what we are in 4 months. She looked at him. You're comfortable with that. I'm not comfortable with any of this, he said. I haven't been comfortable in 3 weeks. Comfortable is not the metric I'm using. What metric are you using? He looked at her across the small table. Whether it's real, whether you're actually here. He paused. You're here. She held his gaze for a moment. I'm here, she said. Then Sungwook called. Taehyun was at the building's north entrance lobby in 4 minutes. His legs had not improved overnight in any technical sense. The session work didn't produce results that quickly. The nervous system rebuilt on its own timeline, regardless of urgency. But something had changed in the stairwell, in the corridor, in the act of moving through them under pressure. Not the physical capacity, that was what it was. Still rebuilding, still wrong in specific ways that would take months to fully correct. What had changed was the relationship to the wrongness. He had stopped fighting it separately from everything else. It was part of the situation. He moved through the situation. Sung-wook was in the lobby when he arrived. Lee Jun was at the north door, watching the street. Bak had the east side. He's in the parking structure, Sung-wook said. Level 1. He went in through the pedestrian access. He's not moving. He knows we saw him come in. Yes. He came anyway. Yes. Sung-wook looked at him. Tae-hyun. Hwang's people are 20 minutes out. We wait 20 minutes, and this resolves without... He's been waiting 20 years, Tae-hyun said. 20 minutes won't change what he's prepared to do in there. He looked at the parking structure access door beside the elevator bank. Is he armed? Unknown. Does it matter? Sung-wook looked at him for a long moment. The look of a man who had 19 years of practice at the specific calculation of when to argue and when to understand that the argument was already over. I'm coming with you. Stay on the entrance. If he gets past me and tries to reach the upper floors. I'm coming with you, Sung-wook said again. Flat. Not negotiable. Tae-hyun looked at him. 19 years? Sung-wook said simply. Tae-hyun nodded. They went through the parking structure access door together. Level 1 was low-ceilinged and fluorescent lit in the specific washed-out way of underground parking, the light that made everything look simultaneously too bright and too gray, the light that flattened shadows and turned faces into something slightly less than themselves. It smelled like concrete and exhaust and the particular staleness of enclosed space. 2 rows of parked vehicles, the painted lines on the floor, the numbered pillars. Min-jae was standing beside Pillar 7. He was exactly as Tae-hyun remembered him from the parking structure, photographed tall, weight shifted back, coat dark, older, obviously. The specific agings of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time, and had not put it down when it would have been easier. His face was the face of a man who had arrived at the end of a very long road and discovered it did not end where he had expected. He looked at Tae-hyun, at the way Tae-hyun was walking. The right leg that was still compensating, still slightly wrong in its distribution. You walked upstairs, Min-jae said. There was something in his voice that was not what Tae-hyun expected. Not triumph, not rage. Something more depleted than either. I heard about the stairwell. My people, the ones you didn't get to, they have ears in this building. You've had ears in a lot of places, Tae-hyun said. 20 years of preparation, Min-jae said. And here we are. In a parking structure at 4 a.m. He looked at the floor, then back up. This is not what I imagined. What did you imagine? Something cleaner. A short, hollow sound that was almost a laugh. I imagined you understanding. I imagined a moment where it was clear what was taken from my family, what that cost, what you represent. He looked at his own hands. I spent 20 years building a case, in my head. Evidence and argument. Why this was justice. His hands dropped to his sides. Doesn't feel like justice. No, Tae-hyun said. Doesn't. Don't agree with me, Min-jae said, and something sharp moved through his voice. Don't stand there and... Your father made bad decisions, Tae-hyun said. My father made bad decisions. They made them independently, and the overlap between those decisions destroyed your family's business and shaped 20 years of your life and mine. He stopped walking when he was 6 feet from Min-jae. Close enough. None of that is justice. It's just what happened. Min-jae looked at him. I'm not going to tell you your anger is wrong, Tae-hyun said. You watched everything your father built collapse when you were 20 years old. That is real. That happened. He paused. But you aimed it at me. For 20 years you aimed it at me. And in doing that, you made choices that brought you here to a parking structure at 4 a.m. with a warrant active. And your network dismantled and nothing left of the 20 years except what you chose to do with them. Min-jae was very still. The driver, Tae-hyun said. Park Dojin. His daughter is 8. She has a heart condition. You knew that when you used him. You knew he was desperate enough to do what you needed if you tied it to his daughter's survival. That's not a man fighting for justice. That's a man using someone else's love as a tool. Something cracked across Min-jae's face. The structural kind of crack. The kind that had been building for a long time. I paid for the surgery after it went wrong. After the case started falling apart. Tae-hyun kept his voice even. Not cruel. Just precise. You bought his silence with his daughter's health. That's what that was. Min-jae stopped. His jaw worked. I know what you were trying to do, Tae-hyun said. And I know you've told yourself a story about it for long enough that the story feels true. But you're standing here at 4 a.m. because some part of you knows the story isn't holding anymore. Min-jae looked at him for a long moment. Then his hands came up and Tae-hyun tensed, and Sung-wook moved, but Min-jae's hands came up empty. Fingers spread. The gesture of a man showing that there was nothing in them. The most defeated gesture a person could make. Not surrender exactly. Something past surrender. The physical expression of a man who had been running toward something for 20 years and had arrived at the destination and found nothing there. "I'm tired," Minjai said. It came out small, much smaller than anything else he had said. A man's voice at 4 in the morning, stripped of the 20 years of architecture around it. Just the voice. Taehyun looked at him. "I know," he said. They stood in the fluorescent light of level 1. The paint on the floor was scuffed at the edges of each numbered space. The pillars were numbered in stenciled black. Everything was exactly as anonymous and indifferent as it had always been, as parking structures always were, as the backdrops of significant moments had a way of being ordinary containers for extraordinary contents. "Hwang's people will be here in 15 minutes, Taehyun said. "You can walk out through the lobby when they arrive, or Sungwook's team can walk you out. It's the only choice you have left." Minjai looked at the floor for a long time. Then he nodded. Once, a small, exhausted movement of the head. He sat down on the concrete floor beside Pillar 7, with his back against it and his knees up and his hands between his knees, and he waited. Taehyun watched him for a moment. Then he turned and walked back toward the access door, and the walk was slow and still wrong in the specific ways it had been wrong since he left the hospital bed, and he did not try to make it look like anything other than what it was. Chief Prosecutor Hwang's people arrived at 4:40 a.m. They were professional and efficient in the way of people who had been briefed thoroughly and arrived with a clear picture of what they were collecting. Minjai walked out with them without incident. He did not look at Taehyun again. He looked at the floor of the lobby, and then at the pre-dawn street outside the building's entrance, and then at the vehicle, and he got in. Hwang himself was not present. Men in his position did not attend 4 a.m. arrests. They attended the press briefings that came after, but he called Taehyun's phone at 5:03 a.m., while Taehyun was sitting in Amara's kitchen again, with another cup of coffee in his wrapped hand and the particular quietness of a situation that had finished. "It's done," Hwang said. "Yes. The documentation held. Dujin's lawyer confirmed cooperation this morning. Apparently the offer was persuasive." A pause. "Case is clean, Taehyun. It'll hold." "Good. Your father's name is in the registration documents." "I know. There will be questions." "I know that too." Taehyun looked at the kitchen table, the grain of the wood, at the coffee Amara had made and set in front of him, without asking whether he wanted it. He'll cooperate fully. He has documentation on Minjai's activities that will support the prosecution. Whatever comes from the business registration, he'll face it. Hwang was quiet for a moment. "That's going to cost him." "Yes," Taehyun said. "It will." He ended the call. Amara was leaning against the kitchen counter. She had not slept. Her white coat was gone. She was in the clothes she'd packed when Sungwook moved her. Civilian clothes, a gray sweater and dark trousers, and she looked like herself in a way she sometimes didn't in the hospital. The specific herself of a woman, not performing any professional role, just present. She was watching him with the expression she used when she was deciding how much to say. "Your father," she said. "Yes, you're going to talk to him." "Yes." "When?" "Today," he said. "This morning. Before he hears about the arrest from someone else." He looked at his coffee. He said he'd provide what he had on Minjai. He didn't say it would cost him this much. But he said it, and I'm going to let him keep the promise. She was quiet for a moment. "Do you believe he didn't know about the accident plan?" Taehyun thought about this honestly. The honest version required holding two things simultaneously, what his father was capable of and what his father had actually done, which were not always the same. "I believe he was managing Minjai the way he managed everything else, by keeping it close and believing his control of the situation was better than it was." He paused. "That's not innocence. But it's also not what I thought it might be last night." "What did you think last night?" "That he'd chosen Minjai over me." He turned the coffee cup in his wrapped hand. "He chose his own certainty over me. Again, same choice he made with your letters, with my mother, with every decision he made about my life that I didn't know about. Always the certainty." He looked at her. "But not Minjai." She nodded slowly. "That matters," she said. "It's not enough." "No, but it matters anyway." She came and sat across from him. Her hands were around her own cup. Taehyun, the letters. Kept them 31 letters for 15 years. That's whatever else it was, whatever decision he told himself he was making. That is also a man who couldn't throw away the proof that his son loved someone. He looked at her. "I'm not defending him," she said. "I spent 3 years writing letters into silence because of what he did. I'm not, she stopped, exhaled. I'm saying that people are more than one thing. He's more than one thing. That doesn't fix it. It's true. You're remarkably generous, he said, for someone with personal cause not to be. I'm not generous, she said. I'm a physician. I've spent 12 years looking at what people are made of when they're broken open. It doesn't make you generous. It just makes you accurate. She met his gaze. He's a man who never learned how to love anything without trying to control it. That's not a justification. It's a diagnosis. Taehyun looked at her for a long time. I should have contacted you, he said. 2 years ago, when Sung-wook told me you were in Seoul. I should have. We were both in the same city doing the same thing, she said. Building things that couldn't be taken from us. Waiting until we were ready. She paused. We were ready at the same time. We just needed the situation to make it impossible to keep pretending otherwise. My situation involved a truck. Your situation involved a truck, she agreed. Mine involves a recurrence. The word landed. Not because it was unexpected, he had known since she said yes in the assessment room, but because it was the first time she had said it plainly, without the clinical framing, without the careful management of exactly how much she revealed. He looked at her. She held his gaze. It came back 8 months ago. Small, caught early. I've been managing it. She paused. The treatment is less aggressive than the first time. Prognosis is... She stopped, and the stop was the first place where the composure was not quite holding. It's manageable, with treatment, but it's not gone. 8 months, he said. Yes, you've been in this city for 2 years. You've been managing this for 8 months. Yes, alone. She pressed her lips together. I have colleagues. Alone, he said again. Not as accusation, as the same kind of accuracy she had just offered him. Her eyes went bright for a moment, just a moment. She blinked it back with the focused effort of a woman who had been doing that specific thing, blinking things back for a very long time, since a hospital bed in Atlanta and 31 letters, and a disease that had the particular cruelty of taking the years, when you were supposed to be becoming yourself. I didn't want she started. To be a burden, he said. She stopped. That's what you were going to say. Taehyun. You're going to say, Tae. You didn't want to come back into someone's life already sick, already in the middle of something that was going to demand things from them. He looked at her steadily. That's what the letters were too. You were waiting until you were well enough, until you were built enough, until you could arrive without asking for anything. She looked at the table. That's not how it works, he said. Between people who actually... He stopped, restarted. You don't get to decide for me what I can carry. You have enough... You don't get to decide, he said again. Quiet, firm. The tone he used when a negotiation had reached its final position, and he needed the room to understand there was nothing beyond it. I have spent 15 years not knowing where you were. I found out 3 weeks ago that you were in this city for 2 years while I was in the same city, and that you were sick for 8 months of it, alone. He paused. That's done. That version of this is done. She looked up. His hands, one wrapped, one not, were flat on the table. He was not reaching for her. He was just present, occupying the kitchen table across from her, the way he occupied every room, fully and without apology, except that there was something different in it now from the way he'd always occupied rooms. Something that had been missing from the architecture of him for 15 years and was now quietly back. Tell me what you need, he said. Medically, practically, whatever it is. Tell me. She looked at him for a long moment. Right now, she said. Right now. Right now I need to sleep for approximately 4 hours, she said. And then I need to go back to the hospital, because I have patients who have not stopped having needs because my night was complicated. And the treatment, Thursdays. Infusion center on the 4th floor. I go alone because she stopped, because I've been going alone. I'll come Thursday, he said. Taehyun, I'll come Thursday, he said. I can't carry the drip line for you, but I can sit in the same room, which is apparently something I've been able to do since I was 14. She looked at him. Then something happened to her face that he had not seen in the 3 weeks they had been doing this reconstruction together, something that wasn't the clinical composure, wasn't the careful management, wasn't even the specific bravery of a woman who had been sick before and had found a way to be brave about it. Something simpler and much harder to maintain. The expression of a person who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has just been offered help and doesn't quite know what to do with their hands now. She put her hands over his on the table. He turned one of his over, so they were palm to palm. They sat like that in the kitchen at 5:15 in the morning, While Seoul came up slowly around them, the city finding its early light, the quality of the silence shifting as the first buses began running, as the first street vendors moved into position, as 10 million people began the process of becoming their days. He went to see his father at 8 a.m. Daewon was at the house in Hanamdong, the house Tae-yoon had grown up in, the house where his mother had kept her astronomy books and his father had kept his ledgers, and the space between those two activities had been where Tae-hyun had learned what the inside of solitude felt like. The house was the same as it had always been. Beautiful, expensive, meticulous. The garden was tended by staff who had worked there for decades. The gate opened before Tae-yoon reached it, because it always did. Daewon was in the study. The lower left drawer of the desk was open. The box was gone. Sung-wook had collected it days ago. The drawer was empty. Daewon was sitting in the chair behind the desk, not working, not reading, just sitting, which was something Tae-hyun had almost never seen his father do. Daewon was a man who occupied spaces with purpose or not at all. Sitting and doing nothing was not in his register. He looked up when Tae-hyun came in. He looked at the way Tae-hyun was walking. "You left the hospital," he said. "Yes. You shouldn't have. I know." Tae-hyun sat in the chair across from the desk. The chair where he had sat as a child for the specific version of conversation his father called a talking to. Different now. The room was the same. Both of them were older. Min-jae is in custody. Hwang's case will hold. Your company registration is in the documentation. Daewon nodded. He had known it was coming. He had the look of a man who had known it was coming and had decided not to run from it, which was, Tae-hyun thought, possibly the most honest thing his father had ever done. "I'll cooperate fully," Daewon said. "I know, whatever they need." "I know, father." Daewon looked at the empty drawer, the space where the box had been for 15 years. "I told myself it was protecting you. I know that too." No, it doesn't. Tae-hyun looked at him. "But I need you to know that I know the difference between what you tell yourself and what you intended. You didn't intend to hurt her. You didn't intend to hurt me." He paused. "You intended to manage the situation. You were wrong about what managing it required, and the cost of that wrongness was real." He held his father's gaze. "I'm not going to tell you we're fine. We're not fine. We have a long way to go." Daewon looked at his hands. "But you're my father," Tae-hyun said, "and I'm not done with you. If you want to work toward something different between us, I'm willing to work toward it. That's all I have right now." The willingness. Daewon was quiet for a long time. When he looked up, his face was doing the thing it had done in the hospital room. The day before, the thing Tae-hyun had not had a name for then, and was beginning slowly to have one for now. It was grief. It was the specific grief of a man who had been telling himself he was fine for 30 years and had run out of story to tell. "Your mother," Daewon said. "She would stop." His throat moved. "She would have liked your doctor." Tae-hyun looked at him. "She had that quality," Daewon said carefully, of seeing what was actually there. He paused. "Your mother could see through me in about 30 seconds. I found it unbearable, most of the time, and also the only thing I could trust." He looked at his hands again. "Dr. Bennett has that quality." "Yes," Tae-hyun said. "She does." They sat in the study of the house that was the same as it had always been, and the distance between them was the same as it had always been, and it was also, in some small and unremarkable way, slightly less than it had been the day before. Not fixed, not even close to fixed, but less. Thursday came. Tae-hyun was at the infusion center on the 4th floor of Sungwon Private Hospital at 9 a.m., which was 15 minutes before Amara's appointment. He brought coffee from the cart near the main entrance, not hospital coffee, real coffee. The kind she drank, which he had noticed and filed away in the week they had been navigating this new arrangement of themselves. He sat in the chair beside the infusion station. He put her coffee on the small table beside it. He did not bring his phone, because he had decided before he came that this hour was not going to be divided. She came in at 9:13 in her white coat, because she had rounds before this and would have rounds after, and she stopped in the doorway of the infusion bay when she saw him. She looked at the coffee. She looked at him. She sat down in the infusion chair without saying anything, which was the most complete sentence she could have offered. The nurse came and administered the line with the efficient gentleness that good infusion nurses had. Amara looked at the ceiling while it went in, not the specific ceiling of any room, just a ceiling, a white surface overhead. Tae-hyun looked at her face. He didn't look away. "You're staring," she said to the ceiling. "Yes, it's going to be a long hour. I have nowhere to be, he said. She turned her head and looked at him. The IV line ran from her arm to the bag overhead. The room was quiet and deliberately calm in the way of medical spaces designed for sustained presence. Outside the window, Sol was doing what Sol did. Paper you published, he said after a while. What about it? Recovery is renovation. The system builds around the damage instead of through it. He looked at his right hand, the wrapped one. Healing. I've been thinking about that. About your spine. About everything. He looked at her. We're not the people we were at 15. There's damage on both sides. Things that got built up and around. We're not going to be those people again. No, she agreed. But whatever this is, he gestured between them, the same small, imprecise gesture she had made at the kitchen table. This is also real. Yes, she said, it is. He put his uninjured hand on the arm of her chair. Not on her hand, not on the arm with the IV line. Just on the arm of the chair near her. Present. She looked at his hand on the chair. Then she moved her free hand and put it on top of his. They stayed that way for the hour. 6 months later, Kong Tae-hyun walked into the infusion center under his own power, no rail, no wall, no careful compensation in his right side, and sat down in the chair beside Amara's. She watched him cross the room. She did not say anything about the walking. They were both past, narrating the things that had been hard and had gotten better, because narrating them made them smaller than they were and larger than they needed to be simultaneously, and they had both decided implicitly that the things between them deserved to be their actual size. He sat down. He put her coffee on the table. She was in remission. Had been for 2 months quietly confirmed, gradually trusted, the kind of news that you hold carefully for a while before you let yourself use words like good about it. The treatment was over. The Thursdays would continue, for monitoring, for the blood work, that would be a permanent feature of the landscape of her health. But the infusion was done. She wasn't here for treatment today. She was here because Tae-hyun had a follow-up appointment on the 4th floor, and she had rearranged her morning to be in the same building at the same time, which was the least dramatic possible expression of the decision they had both made over 6 months of Thursdays and kitchen tables and slow rehabilitation, and one very long conversation with Kong Daewon that had lasted 4 hours and ended with both of them sitting in a garden inn. Hanam-dong in silence that was not for once hostile. The follow-up was routine. His mobility was at 87% of pre-injury function, which his physiatrist, a colleague of Amara's who had taken over his case once the clinical boundary required it, described as excellent. He would likely reach 92 to 94% over the next year. The remaining deficit was compensatable. Not fixed, not invisible, but workable. He ran 5 kilometers every other morning now. Not 6, not yet, but 5. Han Min-jae was sentenced 8 months after his arrest. Attempted murder, organized crime facilitation, obstruction of justice. The sentence was significant, and the judge was not inclined toward leniency in a case with this level of documented premeditation. He had cooperated partially enough to confirm what the prosecution already knew, not enough to reduce his sentence meaningfully. He went in with the expression of a man who had finally run out of the energy required to maintain a 20-year posture. Park Do-jin testified. His daughter's procedure had been completed successfully 3 months earlier, funded through the arrangement Tae-hyun had made irrevocable through a legal trust before anything else was settled. Do-jin received his reduced sentence and served 14 months. On the day he was released, a letter was waiting for him at his home address. Inside was a note with a single line. Her medical care will continue for as long as she needs it. No signature. The handwriting was Amara's. Tae-hyun had not told her to write it. She had not told him she was going to. He found out 3 weeks later when Do-jin's lawyer contacted Sung-wook to pass along an acknowledgement. He looked at Sung-wook across the table when Sung-wook told him. Then he looked at the ceiling. Then he looked back at Sung-wook with the expression of a man who has had a specific understanding confirmed. She just decided on her own. Yes, Tae-hyun said. She does that. Park Soo-jin, the hospital contact, had been dismissed and faced administrative charges. She had cooperated with investigators. Her circumstances were complicated. Min-jae had leverage of the financial kind, the debts of a family member kind, and this was noted in the proceedings without making the outcomes significantly different. She was gone from the hospital. The hospital moved forward, as hospitals did, with the particular institutional continuity of places whose purpose was larger than any individual within them. Kong Daewon faced a separate administrative investigation related to the Han Investments registration. He cooperated fully as promised. The outcome was financial penalties and a formal censure of the business activities, none of which touched criminal prosecution. The documentation was sufficient to show he had been operating in a gray zone rather than a black one. And Huang's office had what they needed from the Min Jae case without requiring Daewon's full destruction. He sold his remaining legacy operations during the investigation period. He told Tae-hyun he was selling them in a phone call that lasted 6 minutes and contained, somewhere in the middle of it, a sentence that was as close to an apology as Daewon had ever produced in his life. Tae-hyun had listened to the sentence. He had said, "I know," and he had meant it the way his mother used to mean things, fully, without remainder. On the day that Amara's remission was confirmed at 12 months, they were not in a hospital. Tae-hyun had taken her to the night market, not the original one that Block had been redeveloped years ago, the city's particular way of consuming its own past and replacing it with something glossier and less honest. But there was another one, 2 streets over, that had been running in the same location for 20 years and sold hotteok from a cart on the corner that Tae-hyun had visited twice in the months since he could walk properly again and had confirmed. To his own satisfaction, was objectively excellent. They stood at the cart with the specific hotteok in their hands and the market moving around them, the noise and the light and the smell of something cooking in oil. The city at night doing what the city at night had always done, which was carry on at full volume without asking anyone's permission. Amara ate her hotteok and looked at the street below the market hill and said, "This is good." "I told you," he said. "You were very certain about it." "I'm often right." "You're often certain," she said. "Those are related but not the same." He looked at her sideways. She looked back at him. They had not in 6 months made any large declarations. They had not sat down and named the shape of what they were or agreed on the terms. They had simply continued Thursdays. Kitchen tables, morning runs that she did not join and he reported on, evening conversations that began as brief and did not stay that way, the gradual accumulation of a shared daily life that had not been announced, only built, the way trust worked when it was real, piece by piece, over time. She was wearing the same gray sweater she had worn the night at the Hanam building. He had noticed it. The moment she came out of her apartment to meet him, had said nothing, and she had looked at him, looking at it, and also said nothing. And they had gone to the market in the comfortable understanding of 2 people who did not need to narrate every recognition. "I wrote you one more letter," she said. He looked at her, after everything. "About 2 months ago." She looked at the street. "I didn't mail it. I wasn't going to mail it. That's not how things work anymore. We're in the same city. She gestured vaguely at the space between them, which contained everything. "But I wrote it. Because I needed to say something I couldn't figure out how to say out loud." "What did it say?" She was quiet for a moment. "That I'm sorry it took this long," she said. "That I know I owe you years I can't give back. That I spent a long time being afraid that what I had to offer wasn't enough for what I needed to ask for." She paused. "And that it turns out you were always going to be worth the attempt. All of it. The attempt was always worth it." He looked at the market. At Seoul below them, the city he had spent his entire life inside. The city that had built him and damaged him, and given him exactly this specific corner, this specific evening, this woman beside him eating hotteok on a market hill at the age of 34 with 12 months of remission, and the particular brightness of someone who has been close enough to the edge to know what the view from it actually means. "Promise," he said. She looked at him. "You promised always," he said. "When we were 15. You said always, I remember. Kept it." He turned to look at her fully. "You kept writing. 31 letters into silence. 2 years in the same city. Thursday mornings. One more letter you didn't mail." He looked at her. "That's not someone who broke a promise. That's someone who kept it in every way they could find." Her eyes went bright again. She didn't blink it back this time. "Don't make me cry in a market," she said. "I'm a physician. I have a reputation. Your reputation is fine. It's really not." He reached over and took her hand. She held on. Around them, Seoul at night carried on with its continuous, indifferent, beautiful noise, 10 million lives running in parallel, none of them knowing or caring about the 2 people standing on the market hill. The man who had spent 20 years building things to fill a space he couldn't name, and the woman who had spent the same years building things to earn the right to come back and fill it, and both of them arriving here at the end of a very long road, with their hands around hotteok and each other, in a city that was never going to stop for anything as personal as this. It didn't need to. They were already there.